What are some fascinating facts about serial unalivers? When police eventually came to the house of Ed Gein, they found an absolute pigsty. Gein had been living alone since the death of his brother in a barn fire, and it's speculated that Gein may have orchestrated this same disaster. Anyway, he'd let much of the house go into disrepair. They found countless body parts from his various grave-digging excursions, including a bag of wilted organs and, of course, the infamous skin lampshade and a half-finished suit made of human skin. There were maggots living in old dishes in the kitchen. It was the kind of disorganized mess that you would expect from a man who spent his nights completely disconnected from reality. All except one room. His mother's room upstairs remained absolutely pristine, except for the dust that had collected and seemingly untouched from the time of her death years earlier. He had such a fear or respect for his mother that he was afraid to set foot in her room long after she had died. He claimed to hear her voice criticizing him from time to time. This was the central experience that inspired Norm Bates' character to maintain his mother's home and image in Psycho. Also, a fun fact about Gein. In Taxi Driver, Travis Bickle makes an offhand comment when leaving a diner that he had a cup of coffee and a slice of apple pie with cheese on top. In exchange for details to investigators after his capture, Gein requested the same meal. Pee Wee Gaskins, most prolific serial killer in South Carolina, drove around in a hearse with a bumper sticker that read, "I haul dead people." He told people that he needed it to take the bodies of the people that he killed in his private cemetery. He claimed to have killed between 100 and 110 people. In the John Wayne G. case, there were so many bodies crammed underneath the house that the bodies fused together and the bones had to be sorted for more than 2 years to put together the full skeletons. I think the fact that Ed Gein only killed 2 people is amazing because he's one of the most well-known serial killers. Jeffrey Dahmer gave the people in his apartment building sandwiches that could have possibly been made from his victims' flesh. I went to Marquette University in Milwaukee, not far from Dahmer's apartment building. When the news broke, my boyfriend at the time was riding the bus and a lady was freaking out and crying uncontrollably. She lived in the building and he'd apparently hosted cookouts regularly. I always think about the PTSD the first cop to open that refrigerator must have had. My goodness. I suppose that's one way to get rid of some of the evidence. Absolutely horrific to contemplate that there was even a tiny chance he might have eaten that. Nightmare fuel. Jeffrey Dahmer, towards the end, right before he got caught, had so many bodies in his apartment that he ran out of room and stored one victim in his bathtub. He then proceeded to shower over him every day for a month. Think about that, straddling over a rotten corpse to get fresh and clean for the day. Unreal. The serial killer, Baylor Kiss, liked to pickle people in barrels stored in his basement. Someone figured it out, but they couldn't get him because he was fighting in World War I. By the time they tracked him down, he had disappeared and left a dead guy in his hospital bed. He supposedly joined the French Foreign Legion and deserted that as well. And I think history loses track of him after that, with the exception of one possible sighting as a janitor in New York. The janitor disappeared before anyone could confirm it. I have a family member who briefly dated a serial offender of this nature, the first one to use the internet to find his victims. She almost, but not quite, fit the profile of his victims. One time, when he picked her up, the adult son was visiting the house, met him, and shook his hand. He ghosted her after that. Also, my mum was living in a mobile home park in Wichita during Dennis Rader, or BTK's, killing spree. My dad was deployed overseas. They had a big German shepherd who she had put outside for a little bit every night before going to sleep. And she said for a while she had to bring him in early because he'd just go crazy, barking, growling, and snarling every night. Shortly after he stopped doing that, there was a BTK murder not too far from the mobile home park. Scary stuff. Some older homes in Wichita have a second landline installed by the door because he was notorious for cutting phone lines. People would come home and check the line by the door, then the other line, just to reassure themselves. The Golden State Killer, known at the time as the East Area Unspeakable Act Offender, would often break into the homes of couples, making the women tie up the men. He'd stack dishes on the back of the man and threaten that if he heard the dishes fall, he'd kill everyone in the house and then he'd commit the unspeakable act on the woman and ransack the house for a few hours. At a community meeting about him, a macho man stood up and went on a rant about how a real man would never let such a thing happen to him or his wife. The Golden State Killer then proceeded to attack that man and his wife soon after, meaning he was attending that community meeting about himself. Whenever I read about the BTK killer waiting for one of his victims to come home and then getting frustrated and leaving due to her running late, it gives me chills. That woman cheated death. I find it interesting that apparently the BTK killer installed alarms at people's houses because of their fear of the BTK. Supply and demand, I guess. Dorangel Vargas killed and ate at least 10 people. He only ate men because he said their meat tasted better than women's. He also wouldn't eat fat people because he thought they contained too much cholesterol. In 2016, Vargas was involved in a prison riot in which he killed 2 other inmates and served their remains to other inmates. Frick me, this guy has no chill. How the frick could he kill and cook other inmates before someone realized? Flash frying. Journalist Vlado Teneski was caught when he reported on his own crimes and included information that hadn't been released to the public and only the killer could know. Of the 4 women who disappeared, 3 were found displaying signs of being viciously taken advantage of and tortured before having their air cut off with a phone cord. Though the police had initially revealed that the women had been throttled, they hadn't actually said with what. Noticing that Teneski had correctly named the specific type of phone cord used, they arrested him on suspicion of murder. After questioning him, they obtained a search warrant for his home. His house was filled with adult magazines and notes about the crimes. He had been carrying out his crimes and then writing about them in great detail for the paper, as if taunting the police. While police still have no suspect in these killings, it's likely that he's a really cool and handsome dude. We should all, go easy on him. He's smart too. Article by Vlado Teneski. I'm surprised we don't hear more about Robert Hansen in popular culture. He'd kidnap women and turn them loose in the Alaskan wilderness, where he'd hunt them down like animals. He didn't have the highest number of victims, but his method of hunting them for sport is absolutely insane. Well, he's not the only one to have done it. I forget his name, but apparently a wealthy Mexican politician had the same MO. He once spared a girl and returned her to the street because she refused to run. Sadly, she wasn't believed and he killed several more before being arrested. I'm guessing he wasn't being a nice guy, he just didn't get the excitement of the hunt, so he let her go. She was a dud. Mac Ray Edwards. He was a serial killer who worked for Caltrans. He'd kill his victims and then bury the bodies in places he'd later help build the highways over. Not all of his victims have been found, and many are still very likely under some of the California highways you may have driven over countless times. Albert Fish would stick needles into his pelvis when he was having fun with himself. Stick 'em so deep that sometimes they'd get stuck. He told this to the police, and they didn't believe him until they saw the X-ray. He had particular bedroom interests and particularly liked rough treatment. He also ate feces and drank urine. He called them peanut butter and cider, respectively. He once spent a few months trying to convince a single mother to watch his son. He told her to punish him when he acted up, and over the course of their correspondence, he told her to do nastier and nastier things until he dropped the act altogether and revealed he was asking her to do crap for him and on him. His letters to her are what got him arrested, as she was unnerved by what he was saying and took the letters to the police for indecency laws violations. I mean, most of these people want to be caught and recognized on some psychological level, don't they? It's horrifying in any case. How Jack the Ripper always cut the throats of his victims in a way that stopped the blood from getting on his clothes. I guess it was because he was the first notable serial killer in history, but I always thought he killed a lot of people. Then I found out he only killed 5. Yeah, but he was real messy about it. Blood and guts everywhere. Except on his clothes. In the 70s, there was a serial killer, Rodney Alcala, who was known for unspeakable acting and unaliving women. He went on a dating show and the women ended up choosing him, but luckily she cancelled the date just before. It's real creepy. Dennis Rader, aka BTK, started communicating with police after years of silence in around 2004. He'd gone decades without being caught, and once again he started sending taunting letters and items to them. He asked them if he could be traced if he sent his writings on a floppy disk, and they assured him through a communication in a newspaper that no, they couldn't trace him. He sent them a floppy disk and they found metadata linking to his church. He was arrested shortly thereafter. He was hurt that they'd lied to him because he thought that they'd developed a rapport. What's weird and I guess common is how well hidden that entire aspect of his life was. His family really had no clue. His wife found a poem that he'd written about one of the victims. When confronted, he lied and said it was for a writing assignment for a class he was taking, and he chose to write it about this woman because she was all over the news due to her murder. I think that was the closest a family member came to finding out. John Norman Collins used to pick up women on his motorcycle. The bodies of his victims used to be dumped here and there, but they were always washed. Turns out he only killed women who were on their time of the month. Also, he was referred to as John Norman Collins during his trial. He later changed his last name to Chapman, because there was a lawyer in town whose name was John Collins, and this was a way to distinguish between them. Brazilian serial killer Little Petey murdered over 40 people in prison. He began by murdering the gang leader that killed his girlfriend and then shanked his father, who was in prison for killing his own mother during a visit. Petey was well liked because he was considered a sort of vigilante avenger, despite killing indiscriminately within the prison walls. Apparently there was no difference between a substance user and a murderer in his eyes. Because of Brazil's odd sentencing laws, he could only serve a maximum of 30 years, and he became a YouTuber. He was in many ways a Brazilian celebrity. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Many years ago, I read the entire police report on the Green River Killer. I was fascinated by his attempts to cover his tracks by buying new car tires and destroying shoes, and getting new ones after murders. This was to avoid leaving traceable tracks. Also fascinating that he took the jewelry off of his victims and left it in the ladies' restroom at his workplace, and got off on seeing the found jewelry on various women around the office. Edmund Kemper, also known as the Co-Ed Killer, committed a series of brutal and horrific crimes in California before finally taking revenge on his mother for his troubled upbringing, at which point he drove to Arizona, called the police and confessed to everything, and waited for them to pick him up at the payphone. He provided intimate details of the case before he could get representation, so there was no way to get out of being found guilty for his crimes. In court, a lawyer asked him what he felt was a just punishment for what he had done. He thought about it and replied, "Death in the most painful way, I guess." To this day, he declines to attend parole hearings and has repeatedly asserted that people like him don't belong in society. My grandfather was a social worker that managed Ed Gein, the butcher of Plainfield, when he was at Winnebago Mental Health Institute. He told us that Ed was one of the sweetest old men he'd ever talked to. Really nice guy. Liked to ask about how the workers' families were doing. It's not the strangest thing in this video, but for me, it's eerie how he could go from a sweet old man to a man who made furniture from human skin and body parts. Still weirds me out to this day. To be fair, Gein didn't kill a lot of people either. He was more obsessed with digging up bodies. He's actually the one I have sympathy for because it's clear as day that his mom messed him up beyond repair. She was a monster who destroyed the mental health of her child. Aside from the killing, BTK is such a self-serving, pompous piece of crap. He actually makes people fill out an application to write to him in prison. Guy gave an acceptance speech at his own sentencing. How narcissistic can you get? Not necessarily the killer himself, but the use of DNA and ancestry websites to identify the Chameleon Killer and the Golden State Killer is fascinating. In both cases, they uploaded the killer's DNA as a fake profile to find family matches. Then they traced the family history from there and narrowed down the suspects by location and date. Once they found a suspect, they test that person's DNA against the initial sample to confirm a match. Both cases have great podcasts where they go into detail about the process. Imagine trying to find cool genealogy stuff about your family and getting your Uncle Joe sent down for 13 murders and 50 unspeakable act offenses. Jeffrey Dahmer didn't eat people with tattoos because he said the ink made the flesh taste weird. Be safe, get inked, people. How did he know? I guess he ate one. Probably more than one if he was thorough in making sure the tattoos were the problem. That most serial killers have roughly average, often below average IQs, and their reputation as smart and difficult to catch is because of a couple of high-profile outliers and the fact that their victims are usually the sort of people who cops and society don't pay as much attention to. It's an uncomfortable fact that a murder with no witnesses and no obvious motive is by its own nature extremely difficult to solve. By targeting people you have no relation to with only intrinsic motive, your chances of being caught are already slim. It makes sense when you look at how many of these people are caught by their own hubris or outside factors like weird genealogy sites, rather than by forensic evidence. Scary stuff. The perpetrator, portrayed that one time by Zac Efron, worked at a mental health hotline center with author Anne Rule. Many victims did survive David Parker Ray, the toy box killer, but they didn't remember it, as he'd kidnap victims, use them for a few months, medicate them, and clean them thoroughly before dropping them off unconscious at the side of the road hundreds of miles away. Only some women picked up by him were killed, still more than enough to be classified as a serial killer. Jeffrey Dahmer was neglected by his parents in childhood and hadn't seen his mother for 10 years prior to incarceration. At sentencing, his father and stepmother asked for 10 minutes to say goodbye and hug. His father often visited him in prison and had weekly phone calls with his mother. Despite the heinous crimes, they seemed to have some kind of unconditional love. It makes all of the stories I hear about estrangement seem to have a different, strange perspective. I don't recall which one it was, but I remember hearing that there was a killer who'd only go into the home if the front door was unlocked, because otherwise he didn't feel welcome. Lock your doors, people. Issei Sagawa, a cannibal who was caught in France and pronounced insane. However, after going into a mental asylum in Japan, they declared him sane and he was checked out straight after. He's still free to this day if I remember correctly, and in interviews has stated that he may kill and eat human flesh again. While watching the interviews, I felt beyond unsettled. It really doesn't make me feel better that he's still out there. Mark Brandon Reed, aka Chopper, was a renowned killer in Australia. However, he only targeted substance dealers and people who made attempts on his life. When he got old, he was told he had liver cancer and had only a few weeks to live. He was asked by the television show 60 Minutes Australia if he wanted one last interview before he died. He accepted. When asked about all the murders, which he previously claimed as self-defense, not him, or he'd covered them up, he just straight up confessed to all of them, claiming they were never in self-defense and he'd committed the ones he previously denied. Then he passed away a few weeks later. He went out listing everyone he had ended. It shocked everyone. I'd suggest looking him up. He's very interesting. In 1985, the Night Stalker was terrorizing LA. I was a young Marine out there, and a friend asked if me and another guy could come stay the night since her parents had to go out of town. I thought it was silly. He hadn't hit Orange County, but anything to get out of the barracks. That night, he hit just a few houses down in Mission Viejo. Some kid heard him and alerted his dad, who called the cops. That was the first lead they got. It's always bugged me that I didn't take it seriously at all, and it happened that close. I think we were pretty drunk that night. It was pretty sobering. In the Zodiac killer case, the number one suspect, one Arthur Lee Allen, had a lot of circumstantial evidence suggesting he was the guy. Enough for him to certainly be the Zodiac, but he was never apprehended due to the evidence coming out as negative. Circumstantial evidence was he lived in Vallejo near a couple of the murders. He took one sick day off work, a day after one of the suspected murders happened. His mother gave him a Zodiac watch for Christmas, which had the same symbol. He was incredibly smart and had knowledge about fingerprints and DNA and may have planted false evidence. He also spoke with his friend, Don Chady, before the Zodiac murders, about writing a novel about a man named Zodiac who kills couples at random with a firearm and a torch attached to it, and taunts the police with letters. He told the police he was going to Lake Berryessa on the day one of the murders happened, but went to the coast instead. He also admitted to having bloody knives in his car on the day of that murder, which he claimed he killed a chicken with. The boot print left at one of the crime scenes had the same shoe size as Allen and was a Wing Walker military boot. Allen had been in the Navy before. He was supposedly able to write with his left and print with his right, in which the Zodiac letters are written in. A surviving victim picked his face out of a lineup in 1991, and the evidence gets weirder. He was arrested in 1974 for inappropriate conduct around children and released in 1977. There were no Zodiac letters sent during this period. He was a schoolteacher and was fired in 1968 because of more inappropriate behavior. In one of the letters, he threatened to unalive his pupils. He wanted to be a bouncer at his friend Ralph Spinelli's nightclub, but that guy wouldn't let him. He told him he'd go to San Francisco to kill a cabbie. That night, Paul Stein, a cab driver, was shot point-blank in the head. Multiple search warrants were made against Allen in the early 90s, and the search conducted found bombs and formulas for bombs which were identical to the ones found in the Zodiac letters. An unidentified man named Lee was known to associate with one of the victims, and Allen always went by his middle name. He died in August 1992, a month before he was meant to meet up with investigators about the case. There is some evidence against it being Allen as well. He was overweight, and a witness says Allen was not the man they saw on the night of the Paul Stein murder. Fingerprints didn't match, and a palm print found on the letter didn't match DNA and didn't match a stamp licked. Allen had a habit of getting other people to lick his stamps because the glue made him feel sick. Nobody was ever arrested during the Zodiac case. Despite its popularity as a pop culture meme or a TV reference, I didn't really know the backstory of this until now. Thanks for the write-up on one of the most prominent suspects. Glad this man is no longer among the living. The first serial killer on written record is from 5th century Yemen. Also, according to an FBI and private study in the US in 2018, they estimate anywhere between 150 to 2,000 active serial killers in the US. Edmund Kemper is just a really crazy dude. Apart from the fact that he was nearly 7 feet, the main thing that stuck out to me was that he was so smart, and that only 6 years after killing both his paternal grandparents and being diagnosed as criminally insane, he convinced psychiatrists he was rehabilitated, before he went on a violent killing spree and then turned himself in, totally of his own volition, as the police had no idea who he was. H. Holmes. He literally built a murder castle. The book The Devil in the White City is about him. Also, there's apparently a series in the works about it from Hulu. He confessed to 27 murders, though it could have been higher. Authorities say it may only have been 9. How this guy is rarely mentioned boggles my mind. He built just to be able to inflict pain and take lives. I ran across a story about Robert Burdella, the butcher of Kansas City, and I was familiar with the neighborhood where he lived. I used Google Maps to find his home, only to be shown a space between 2 other houses. When Burdella's trial was over, a local businessman bought the home and demolished it, reportedly so it wouldn't become a shrine to one of these people. When did you see someone lose big and go nuts at a casino? I work in IT for a casino, and I just had to replace a phone that was ripped off the wall and thrown at one of our pit bosses over a bad loss. I've been a dealer for 10 years. 3rd day of dealing, fresh out of dealer school, I'm dealing Pai Gao tiles. This is like an Asian domino game. You try to get pairs and tiles to add up as close to 9 as possible, on a $25 minimum game. A guy is there consistently betting between 25 and 75 for a good 2 hours. He then slides his whole stack on one hand for $3,000. For those of you who know the game, he gets Tin Dai Bo. I pull Jijun. For those who don't know the game, it's like he got pocket kings and I got pocket aces. Or that he pulled a 20 in blackjack and I just pulled 11 cards to make 21. The odds are astronomical and it's the only hand that could beat him. He slams his fist on the table, swearing in Chinese, chips are flying everywhere, and he begins to shove his finger down his throat. He blows big chunks all over my game. I close the table and pit down for cleanup. That's my 3rd day on the job. The money and benefits are great though. I highly recommend the industry. I made between $30 and $40 an hour. A gentleman at a poker table in the 5-seat game unzipped his pants and relieved his bladder on the dealer. I never caught the signal the dealer used, but it was effective as all the guys who normally collect boxes from the tables show up out of nowhere and removed him from the table like they were taking out the trash, which I think they were. The table broke up so they could clean, the dealer showered and put on a new uniform, and I saw her on the floor again a few hours later. Table games dealer here. I work at a casino in New Zealand. Had a Thai woman a few months ago betting $300K every hand. She lost $12 million at my table in less than an hour. The casino then paid for her private charter jet to Melbourne and back, which was $70K, just so that she could get more money. I'm not exactly sure why she had to go to Melbourne to get more money, but I was doing a 16-hour shift, and she came back to my table after her trip and dropped another 15 mil. Haven't had anyone close to spending that much money ever again. She'd also flash herself at dealers for luck and requested only young white dealers. Almost all baccarat dealers at my casino are Asian, so I had to deal with her every night for 10 days. Wait, so she spent at least $27 million at your table then? All of her weirdness and racism aside, what the actual hell? I know that running casinos is generally regarded as a ridiculously lucrative, albeit gross and depressing way to make money, but as a guy who's lived in New Zealand, that one woman alone had to constitute a majority of that place's earnings for a few years. There aren't big fancy casinos over there apart from maybe in Auckland. Bloody Jaffers. Also a warning that from this point on, there's a couple of stories sprinkled throughout about people who decide they don't want to be alive anymore after losing big. So that's a heads up. A guy drove off the parking deck just to end things after he lost at the casino I worked for. Former table dealer here. I've had drunk guys tell me I'm the worst dealer ever, that I suck. I'd just reply, have a nice day. The other people at the table were generally on my side. I've higher rollers slam the table with their fists or not react at all to losing thousands. The worst and saddest one that sticks in my mind is a guy who was around 2K down on blackjack. This guy was nice. He was tipping pretty well. I was rooting for him, as I tended to do. I knocked his tens for good luck. Then he lost a big one and just yelled, "Frick!" so loud that the entire casino must have heard. It was the kind of desperation in his voice and everything about him that told me he couldn't afford to lose as much as he just lost. He went to the ATM and I rotated to another table. It was crap like that, the gosh darn smoke in my face, the sleep deprivation from the late nights that led me to get out of there. A lot of other unpleasant moments too, but they all blur together. Money was nice, but it wasn't for me. I was a waitress in a casino establishment 10 years ago. Self-deletions weren't common there, but they did happen. The saddest was a woman who threw up a rope and finished her evening strung up in the toilets. She had lost 20K or so from memory and was not a high roller type. 3 to 4 days later, her car was to be towed from the underground park. Sadly, she'd left her 2 fluffy dogs in there and nobody knew. The poor things were also dead. The establishment then put on parking patrol officers who check cars every few hours. They'd find live dogs and kids in there far too often. I quit after 6 months as I was tired of watching miserable zombies. My girlfriend's grandfather won it big one night and then was followed home by 4 people and killed for the money. So that's the worst way I've seen someone handle a win. The people that did it still write to her father asking for help with parole or whatever apparently. Worked as a security guard on a night shift. The biggest losers are in a fantasy land where they don't even notice. Never actually saw addicts get worried about their futures. I worked in banking for a bit, and being able to see people's accounts who are gamblers backs up this statement. They don't go in and get out, say, $500 on an ATM and then lose it, get upset and go home. They get 100, then 80, then 140. On my end, I'd see the transactions with the $3 fee attached all on the same night, within minutes of each other sometimes. It seems like sometimes they're in a trance and they probably have almost no idea how much money they've actually lost. One guy was so angry at his losses that he took 200 quarters, cut them in half, taped one side, and proceeded to put them in various slot machines. Once they entered the machine, it would jam up. I actually did work in a casino in Las Vegas a few years back, in VIP services. One of our high rollers who visited frequently had a very bad gambling problem that his wife was divorcing him over. He lost everything at the tables and couldn't even afford his plane ticket back home. He threatened to go to the roof of the hotel and throw himself off. The casino felt sorry for him. We ended up buying him a ticket back home. Never heard from him again after that. Yes, it did actually happen. It was a brand new casino, so I'm sure they didn't want to risk just ignoring his threats. Also, no one made him gamble. Vegas was not built on winners. I used to be a casino host on cruise ship casinos. I've seen people lose their crap a lot, but there's one woman I'll never forget. She was gambling so much. Towards the end of the cruise, I'd find her on the slots. She'd be crying and playing. I asked her what's wrong, and she said, "I can't afford to play anymore. This is all on my credit card." She was talking, playing, and crying at the same time. I banned her from the casino, but it was already too late. I also heard stories from colleagues that used to work for an Asian cruise company that they'd always keep one lifeboat half lowered because people would jump overboard after losing all their money. I worked in the cage before becoming a dealer. The saddest thing I used to commonly see was people getting cash advances of $15 and paying a $7.99 fee to do it. It was $7.99 to get up to $100 from the machine, with $15 being the minimum withdrawal. So they were paying a 50% fee to waste $15. I guess they thought that big jackpot was right around the corner. So sad. Desperation and an addictive personality are a truly terrible combination to have going on. Folks, if you're on your last $100, please, for the love of God, if you need something to fill your empty hours, buy a cheap addictive video game and do that in the evenings instead. It lasts a lot longer for your money. I was security at a casino for a few years. The saddest story for me was this older gentleman, let's call him Tom for privacy's sake. Tom would frequent the casino every day, spending anywhere from $200 to $300. I struck up a lot of conversations with him because he was a regular and he was a genuinely kind person who I enjoyed seeing. One day, Tom comes in and I can tell he's upset. I don't make anything of it, but after seeing the guy for a few years almost every day, that day he looked really off. So a couple of hours go by and I track him down and I ask, "How's the day going? Any big wins?" Just general chit-chat. He starts sobbing. tears running down his face. His wife had passed from sudden cardiac death, is what I believe he called it, the night before, and he was devastated. We talked for quite a while. I tried comforting him while he played the machines. I'd noticed he was betting extremely large, like $200 to $300 per spin on the slot machine. I knew that was a lot for him, but I didn't say anything because it's not my business, and I was sure it was a coping mechanism for him at the moment, doing something that he loved when he just lost the love of his life. Hours later, I saw him heading out the door. I ran up to catch up to him, caught him and wished him all the best and said see you soon. He smiled, said thanks for the chat and thank you for the condolences and left. He booked a room in our hotel and self-deleted that night. A little while later, I found out through some other staff who were sort of friends with his family that he'd spent all of his money, every dime that evening, spinning high limit on the machines. I'm assuming just because he wanted a little enjoyment before he finished things up. It still makes me upset that I didn't invite him over or do anything else because I knew he was in pain. Haven't been in the gaming biz since the 1990s, but I've seen everything from tantrums on the floor to attacks on workers. The worst one, though, was some moron right out of prison with his homies who lost his money on the blackjack table, took it personally, went out to his car, waited for the dealer to get off work, followed him, and then beat the living crap out of him when he stopped for gas. Well, we had a guy jump from his suite on the 18th floor. We still have the divots in the pavement where his leg bones drove into the asphalt. My friend just started at the new Catskill Resort Worldwide Casino and has already said 2 people have been kicked out for doing the deed on the casino floor. One guy got undressed in the bathroom and started washing his clothes. That place has been open for 2 weeks. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I worked casino EMS and security. Horsemen decide that they don't want to be alive in our venues all the time. They're alcoholics, so at least one drinks themselves to the hospital every year, and they like to knife each other too. Someone drove a car into the casino wall, not the doors, the wall. The driver had a traumatic brain injury and luckily didn't injure anyone else. Someone else left the casino drunk and on a bunch of substances, drove through someone's house and ended them. There was another self-deletion by a shotty in the parking lot. Someone else punched a machine and broke the giant touchscreen. That was $5,000 to replace, and that made them a felon. People are constantly taking too many substances in the bathrooms, like a lot, and others get so desperate that they'll wander up and down the aisles looking for pennies left on the machines. We had a guy jump off the parking garage. We had another shoot his wife's lover in the garage and kill him before turning the weapon over on himself. Not a casino employee, but the other day my father-in-law, who's security, watched an elderly lady lose everything at the poker table. She then went around and stole a couple of people's purses and wallets. When they confronted her and asked for ID, she wouldn't give it to them because they weren't the police. When the police arrived, she still wouldn't give them her ID or even her name, saying they couldn't arrest her if they didn't know who she was. Needless to say, they arrested her. The last thing the cops asked her was, "Are you at least going to cooperate and walk out with us to the car, or are you going to do this the hard way?" They had to carry her out, and she was kicking the windows in the back of the car the entire time. An older gentleman left the casino I was working at the time to go get the car while his wife went to the washroom. However, instead of getting to the car, he doused himself in gasoline and, well, you know what happened next. Not an employee, but my mum's friend won a slot machine jackpot. Security had to swoop in and save her because she was a very casual gambler and would use like 5 coins then leave. But that night, on one of her first coins, she won the jackpot. The people around her were gambling addicts, and some of them had been working that machine for hours beforehand and felt like it should have been their win. So they tried to attack her for the money, but she did get it in the end. This wouldn't have been a big win either because it was a small place, but still scary how far people will go. Yep, gambler's fallacy actually transforming into a rage when someone else wins is an angle of that way of thinking that I hadn't considered before, but now it seems like an inevitable conclusion in the casino environment. A guy jumped from the 4th story of the parking garage, note in his car stating that he lost everything, savings, retirement, college funds, all of it. I sat next to a guy. He drove a Pepsi truck. He said his mum died and left him $30,000. He had never seen this much money before, so he thought he could turn it into $100,000. We were at the blackjack table. He was getting wasted and crying inconsistently because of his mum, talking about her dying. The cocktail waitresses are taking advantage and egging him on the whole night, and he was tipping them $25 for every drink. In 2 hours, he loses everything. He has this look of nervousness on his face and said his wife was going to murder him if she found out about this because they have 4 kids and wanted to buy a house. He walked out. 10 minutes later, I went to my car and see that he got a DUI. In 24 hours, his mum had died, he got a ton of money, lost it all, will probably get divorced, got a DUI, and was sitting in the back of a cop car with blue balls from the cocktail waitresses. I watched my uncle lose everything at the blackjack table, so he proceeded to the bathroom, came out with his pants off and threw them on the table and said, "Pants plays." The dealer said, "We can't take your pants, sir." The guy said, "Why not? You've taken everything else." Needless to say, he was escorted out of the casino very upset. I've worked in casinos for nearly a decade, and the saddest ones are the players who lose and show no aggression or sadness at all. I had a player who was down $1 million US at the end of a night of roulette, and he had a completely vacant 1,000-yard stare look on his face as he quietly left. Not an employee, but my girlfriend and I were at a local casino for dinner on Saturday, so we decided to take a lap around the playing floor afterwards. We were walking by the blackjack tables and noticed a small crowd around a guy who had a pile of chips in front of him. After it's clear that he'd lost it all to the dealer, he started screaming and that he couldn't lose, and began to slam his head into the table. He ended up leaving in handcuffs. Oh boy, the guy who lost $100 million then sued Caesars for allowing him to continue to gamble at its properties has to be up there. You know, if you had $100 million and just frickin' loved gambling, you could blow $7 to $10K a night every night for the rest of your life and probably clear another $1 to $2 million a year in investment income. And losing a few grand is almost always enough to get all the comped food, drinks, and rooms you'd like. You could live like a king, tossing chips to all the pretty girls, and secure in the knowledge that as long as you stick to your budget, it wouldn't hurt you in the long run. And you could do it as long as you liked. Yet this guy blows it all in a year. I have never understood people like that. I worked as a slot tech, caught my casino cheating customers with a promo wheel with weights, so it was impossible to win. I reported it to a lottery official on site. Nothing was done, and I was fired for a BS reason a week after the wheel was removed. Figured that since everyone is posting about gamblers losing, I'd post something about a casino losing. My uncle worked at a casino for years. He had a lot of horror stories, but the worst by far was this one guy who lost a large sum of money playing cards. The second he lost, he pulled a get out and ended things right there at the table. Not an employee, but there was this one guy who incurred millions in debt from gambling in casinos, went on a rampage, set some casino tables on fire, and killed 37 people in the process. They all died from suffocation and smoke inhalation. I've had a few patrons lose a ton and never come back, only to find out later they drove their car into a tree or put a shotty in their mouth. I do have a good story about the worst I saw someone handle a win. There was this older gentleman who was a regular and a total jerk. Never tipped, never smiled or said hello, and was always in a foul mood. I was watching him play a 50-cent machine one night when he hit 3 jackpot symbols and won $5,000. I went up to him and congratulated him, and I'll never forget the bemused look on his face. When the machine hits a single payout of over $1,200, the machine locks up and won't spin again until an attendant resets it. He just kept hitting buttons in vain, trying to keep playing like a child whose toy stopped working. When I told him that the machine wasn't going to spin until we paid him, his only words were, "Well, can I play this one?" and motioned to the machine next to his. I told him that he could, and he moved over and went straight back to his zombie trance. When we brought his jackpot winnings to him, he huffed and puffed because we'd asked him to stop playing for a minute while we counted out his $5,000. It's like the money didn't even matter. Working at a casino can be a lot of fun, but the worst thing about it is that you know you're a substance dealer, and your whole job is to make sure people keep taking your product. Look, folks, the narrator has already segued into video games once already in the story grouping, but I'd like to stress again how similar some of these gamers are to regular PC or console gamers with their need to do these motions just for the thrill of playing the game itself rather than winning anything. It may not satisfy all of you, but if you're ever in a toss-up between becoming a gambler or a gamer, maybe take the latter. It seems cheaper. I had a roulette spinner tell me that one time a woman came in and gave this other lady a check to cash out and announced, "All right, time for me to win my rent money for the month." The dealer handed her the check back and said, "Ma'am, we're not accepting your money in this hotel. Please take this check and go pay part of your rent with it and work to pay the rest." This is supposed to be a place of fun, not where you risk your life. I saw a drunk guy pour his beer all over the slot machine after losing. Needless to say, security came over where he proceeded to speak only Spanish. They brought out an interpreter, so he refused to speak at that point. They escorted him somewhere else. I work in a city with casinos. Someone unalived themselves and their body was found on top of an elevator in the casino's parking structure. These sort of things happen pretty often in casinos. I wasn't working at the time, but rather playing poker when a guy went super tilt after a bad hand. Anyway, he dove onto the table and thrashed around, scattering the cards and throwing everyone's chip stacks all over the place before security wrestled him out. It took a good 30+ minutes to sort everything out. That's also the day we came to respect just how powerful casino surveillance cameras are. They were able to locate and replace every single chip to exactly where it was before his tantrum. When I see this question, I think of this high roller who lost a crap ton and then proceeded to make an elaborate bomb extortion plot that ultimately failed because his ransom instructions were way too complicated to follow. When I was in Vegas, I was watching a very intense game of blackjack on Fremont Street. The guy bet everything he had, convinced, since he was on a winning streak, that this would be the hand that doubled his winnings. Unshockingly, he busts. As soon as they swooped his chips away, he began slamming his hands on the table, screaming, "What the frick? What the frick?" with his girlfriend, dressed in a cheesy tight mini dress and 7-inch heels, screaming at him and telling him that he promised her a Birkin purse with that money, and crying. An unsuspecting guy accidentally bumped into this irate dude, and that just made the guy lose his crap. A chair went flying, the guy had bumped into stepped up and started asking him if he wants a piece of this. Shoves are exchanged, and the screaming starts just as a high heel is thrown straight past the sore loser's face and right into someone else's head. I wanted to stay and watch the throwdown, but my boyfriend yanked me away with a solid nope. Just as well, there were 2 furious-looking Vegas PD officers who were literally shoving their way through the crowd as we stepped away. What's the most bizarre thing you've ever witnessed on a security cam? I worked in a well-known discount retailer a few years ago, and I was friendly with the store detectives. One day, they called me into their camera room to show me some footage they got over the weekend. Several overhead views of a middle-aged man lingering behind various younger women, looking all around, waiting for his window, and then bending down quickly to sniff their rear ends. He was slick. None of them seemed to notice this guy crouched right behind them with his face just a couple of inches from their butts. They got him on camera doing this like 4 or 5 times before they tracked him down and told him to leave the store. Oh boy, I've been on the opposite end of this. I worked IT at a fairly big company. I used a scooter to move around the tile floor building while fixing things from room to room. Well, one day, most of the employees were in a big meeting room meeting about something. I just so happened to need to go into that room to restart a switch. Now, I was really good at drifting around corners on said scooter and had made a habit of doing this around the corners. Yeah, I know, I had this coming. Well, unbeknownst to me, not only were they having a meeting in said room, there was also water spilled right in front of the room. So, right as I drifted around the corner, I hit the water and of course lost control and absolutely slammed into a metal industrial fan they had at the entrance. It was frickin' loud, and of course I caused the whole meeting to stop mid whatever they were talking about. The head presenter saw the whole thing and was doubled over, just laughing his guts out. Most everyone else was just confused. Cue 2 weeks later, I got asked to come help set up something which broke during our meeting, quote, and I showed up to the same room with the same people. As soon as I walked in, the CEO and owner pops open the video footage on the projector for everyone to see. I'm not gonna lie, it was pretty damn funny. I unfortunately don't have a copy of the video anywhere that I know of. I think I was given a copy on a flash drive, but this was so many years ago and I've lost track of it since. I honestly have been kicking myself over losing that for a while. I'll try and find it in my boxes of crap if I get the time. Also, it wasn't a highly important meeting. Apparently it was just a bi-weekly meeting the company had to have, and it wasn't a huge company or anything, maybe 100 total employees. Everyone thought it was hilarious, so yeah, that was fortunate. The only downside was the janitor finally figuring out what all the streak marks on the tiles were coming from. It's good to have employees like this to raise morale from time to time with their antics. Also, I wonder what speed that scooter was going for you to be able to drift on it, because to be honest, that doesn't seem safe. Around 2003, I was working at Sam's Club in loss prevention. One day, while watching the tapes, I saw an old man uncomfortably approach the tire mounting area. He proceeded to drop his pants and sit on a stack of tires about 3 high. Got up and walked away a few minutes later. Upon inspection, we discovered that he went number 2 on the stack of tires. Of course, we knew before we saw it because it stank so very badly. A woman I know went to a casino about 2 hours after they opened on a weekday to get tickets for a show. As she was walking by the security desk, 2 women behind it were laughing hysterically. She knew one of the women and asked what was so funny. Turns out a couple of minutes earlier they'd found a pair of women's underwear. That's not too strange in itself, but that early on a weekday in the middle of a main walkway, plus the fact that they're big old granny panties, got them curious, so they were replaying the security tape. Sure enough, a little old lady in a dress with a walker was just walking along when her undies just started to drop off. Every step they fell a little more till they hit the floor. She stepped out of them and kept going. I used to work in the control room at a county jail about 10 years ago. It was our job to control all the automated doors and the security cameras in the facility. This included following officers with the cameras during wellness checks every 15 minutes through our special housing, which involved checking each individual's cell's camera. One day, we were following the officer on the first check after lunch was handed out. We started checking every cell's camera. There were a lot of undressed guys eating sandwiches, but that's nothing unusual, to be honest. And then we got to the 6th or 7th cell. The first thing I saw when the feed came up was blood. There was blood everywhere. The bed, the sink, the toilet, the walls. It's on everything. But the guy was amazingly still on his feet and screaming at the officer when we enabled the intercom. He's screaming, "I don't need it! I'll never need it again, so just take it!" And he throws something at the door. His member. He threw his severed manhood at the door. He broke his lunch tray and used one of the pieces to cut his downstairs thing off. Because, as he saw it, he wasn't going to need it again because he was going to be sentenced to prison. I don't even remember what his charges were, but I remember that he was only looking at about 2 years maximum. I worked in a full-contact haunted house this past Halloween. It was fun hearing the security guards talking about the stuff they saw on monitors. Then the owner said that once he was walking by the monitors when he saw an actor pick a guy up over his head and throw him over his shoulder into the coffin, which was padded and really comfy. The owner was kind of mortified. The security guard nonchalantly said, "Yeah, he's been doing that all night." I used to work security night shift in a 34-floor hotel. While doing my rounds, I walked by the gym to see a huge hole in the wall. We're talking 1 meter by 1.5 meters, with one of our potted ferns which had been dragged in front to pathetically try to cover it. After reviewing video footage, I found this 300-plus pound man running on the treadmill. The man had probably never used one in his life and seemed to be struggling with the controls. He was running faster and faster and eventually couldn't keep up. He went flying off, rammed into the wall, and stayed down for at least 5 minutes. He eventually got up, covered up the hole with the fern, and walked out sadly. I haven't watched Family Guy in forever, and I can still vividly picture Peter Griffin doing this down to the mannerisms. This is actually kind of sad. That poor man, he must have been humiliated. And yeah, property damage and all. He'd probably been fat-shamed and this just broke his spirit that little bit more with embarrassment. Imagine laying on that floor, probably hurt and hurting inside. This made me so sad. One place I worked at was a hidden bunker in the middle of nowhere. We were only network security, but we moved there after September 11th because someone in management thought that it would just make a good bit of PR about how secure we kept everything. The car park looked like it was just a random paved area in the middle of fields, hidden down a tiny country lane as the entrances couldn't be seen that easily. We had cameras watching the outside, and one weekend a bunch of expensive cars pulled up, people got out and started filming an adult movie and then just drove off. But the weirdest thing was that we noticed the cows in the field next door always had at least one cow watching the entrance. They took turns. One cow would always start watching the door before another would look away to start eating. We got a little obsessive about trying to find any footage where there wasn't a cow staring at the door, and we could never find any. Saw a trucker drive his huge trailer to the loading station and fit it in like a glove. Perfect. First try. Then falling out of the cabin dead drunk. Damn Russians. This isn't something bizarre in particular, but you should just know that if you fall on camera, everyone that works in the building that a security guard likes will see that video multiple times. If there's security footage in the stairwell in my residential building, I'm willing to bet that they have a tape dedicated to the goofy crap the narrator has done in the stairwell. Dropped fragile groceries, sneaking past the old neighbor that always wants to burst out and talk, putting his glasses on over his contact lenses and falling down the stairs. If those cameras exist, I want the footage played at my funeral. One of my customers, who was drunk, cycling home completely undressed. My boss and I proceeded to follow them, just wetting ourselves laughing, and the funniest bit was when an ambulance started following too. Once my customer had arrived home, the paramedics proceeded to have a chat with him. He was still completely undressed, of course. I work at a car plant, I won't say which company, but every night, this homeless guy hops the fence and sleeps in a car, and he's out by 4 a.m. on the dot. Myself and the other security guards decided not to report it since there's never any damage or things missing from the car. Security officer at a bank, we had cameras on the inside and on the outside, with the idea being that the outdoor cameras could capture a license plate during a heist. Thankfully, that never happened while I was working there. One day, something in the upper right corner of an outdoor camera feed caught my eye. I couldn't figure out what it was, but it looked like a small animal moving back and forth. I sent one of the other officers to investigate and he came back shaking his head with a big grin on his face. It was a homeless person stroking his eggplant in broad daylight. I used to work night security summers at this recreational campground. Had tent sites and RV hookups, but also cabins, ranging from simple to top of the line with their own hot tubs. There were multiple pools, tennis courts, miniature golf, the works. It was camping for people that didn't want to go camping, basically. One night, a group of young women in their 20s or so, it turned out later it was a bachelorette party, approached the back gate cameras almost in military-style formation. They turned and all 6 flashed their chests at the cameras. The incident became known as the 12-gun salute. I watched a pickup park outside a garage-style storage unit. The driver walked away. Hours later at dusk, another guy crawled out from under a tarp on the bed of the truck, rolled up the storage unit door, rolls an ultralight out of the unit and flies off. Another one, less bizarre and more horrifying, recovered footage of a parking structure collapsing into an occupied shopping center food court to assist with recovering hopefully living victims. I did this program that let you experience life as a police officer while in high school. I had a uniform and everything. I was allowed to work in the jail, but my stepdad worked there too and wouldn't let me work days or in certain parts for fear of harassment. One time I worked an overnight weekend shift in the jail communication and security room. Someone came in with a guitar or banjo, turned on the comm for a couple of isolated rooms, and played a whole bluegrass-type song for the inmates. They were dancing and knee-slapping on camera. It was a great time. Also crazy that you had to unlock each door remotely each time, and the officers couldn't access them on their own. It was a great learning experience, to be honest. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I wasn't watching a camera so much, but was working the front desk. The call button to the main elevators was hard to find because of a poorly placed potted plant. This one lady couldn't find the call button, and before I could walk over to show her where it was, she resorted to knocking on the elevator door. It took all I had to hold my laughter until the elevator closed with her inside. I had access to cameras at my old job and I'd watch them whenever something interesting happened. One time we had a drunk guy come and squat and then smear his brown matter all over our walls and then simply walk away. Oh boy, have I got some doozies. Got a few years under my belt doing this, so let's go. I watched a guy knock an automatic sliding door completely off the track because he was too busy looking at his phone. We had to call in a techie to fix it. I've watched a poor old lady stop in front of the escalator briefly, and when she moved, there was a brown spot on the floor. She'd started to go number 2 and tracked it up the escalator and halfway across the store to the bathroom. When she got done and came out of the bathroom, she continued shopping like nothing had happened. Our store was a biohazard for the rest of the day. I watched one chick pull out a pair of bolt cutters out of her purse to cut the security wire on some handbags. She cut 2 wires and ran off with 4 bags. She got caught later that afternoon. I watched another guy try to steal a spinner of sunglasses only to misjudge which automatic door opened and slammed into it, sending glasses flying fricking everywhere. He got away with the fixture and maybe 4 pairs of glasses. I've got a lot more of these if you guys want them. Yes, please, my goodness, that thief of the century is incredible. I wonder how much street cred he got for those 4 broken pairs of sunnies, the spinner, and the concussion. Here are the other stories that this author promised us. I watched a girl buy a gumball from our machine, proceeded to chew it and stick it to a dress, and then go back to her mum. Once we confronted her about it, she replied, "I didn't do that," and we told her we had it on camera, and she changed it to, "I shouldn't have done that." Turns out her mum just told her not to buy a gumball and was livid. She immediately stopped what she was doing and left with her daughter in tow and told us she'd handle it at home. Never saw them again. Was closing one night, and when we went to roll down the blast door, a giant 3-foot snake fell out of it. Luckily, it was already dead. No one believed us until we played the footage. I've watched people come in, purposefully damage merchandise, then point it out to an employee and try to buy it at a discount. Watched one chick take $800 worth of merchandise into a fitting room and come out with a full shopping bag. When she tried to leave, she ran into someone she knew and decided to wander the store for an hour with them before attempting to leave again. Watched a guy pop the curb in his 4x4 truck and drive all the way to the doors so that his wife could hop out and run in, since it was raining. People are just weird, man. I work weekends at a hospital for a security company with hundreds of cameras all over the hospital. I frequently am assigned to be the officer who watches cameras in the rooms of patients under observation, when they have threats to themselves or nursing staff, and we have access to all the files in our archives. Let me preface my main story with some of the shorter stories from my tenure. There was a patient just snapping and bashing a security guard's head against the doorframe and spilling his blood all over the floor, the Super Bowl, pointed at a waiting TV area, a woman taking a staple out of a book binding, pricking her wrist in a self-deletion attempt, a man on bath salts who came in with his girlfriend's finger in his mouth, screaming in agony because he thought the staff were aliens trying to commit the unspeakable act on him, another guy dropped off in the lobby who had bled out in seconds from a stabbing wound, a clinically dead patient who had taken too much smack, on a stretcher coming back to life flailing like a zombie, hundreds of nurses flirting with doctors and male nurses, nurses with dying patients checking Instagram, we have good cameras, a self-deletion archive, a 150-pound, 5'7" security guard taking down a 6'4", 250-pound patient, dozens of old people falling on their way out of the hospital after being treated for falling. We should note that wheelchairs are always offered in these cases. But anyway, on to our main event. The most bizarre thing I've ever seen in the archives is one of the patients under observation escaping security and making it all the way to his car, completely starkers. This guy was admitted for reasons that I've only heard secondhand. He was young, maybe mid-20s, and he looked normal compared to most of the psychiatric patients that come to the ER. Most likely delusional and a danger to himself, but the key to his story was that he came to the hospital for help with his problems, but didn't know that by telling us he was thinking of self-deleting, that a doctor would order him under observation and he'd be unable to leave the hospital whenever he wished. Now, the process of getting care for mental health issues in an emergency room can take hours because the specialized staff are off-site, and only one is present on campus at any given time. He decided that he couldn't wait and that coming to the ER was a mistake, so he decided to escape. However, this particular patient was smarter than your average case. He took note of the cameras, the angles of each one, and watched the other patients nearby intently as they were escorted by security to a completely stripped special bathroom. As the security guard in the small room that joined with his and a few other patients' rooms opened a door to the adjacent hall where the bathroom was located, the guard would immediately turn his or her attention to the other patients. Next to the bathroom was another observation room, but that guard was usually seated. Both of these officers, he seems to gather from the smirk on his face, weren't allowed, under any circumstances, to leave their posts unless removed. Anyone running from this officer would have a huge head start before a free officer could be summoned over the radio. All he had to do was get out of reach of the nearest one, and they wouldn't be able to follow. There was one problem with this. The bathroom door opened up towards the seated guard in the hallway. Apparently this guy had devised a solution to his problem and asked the first guard to use the bathroom. Everything went as planned from his point of view. Guard number 1 opened the door, let him walk to the hall, and then went back to the other patients. Guard number 2 remained seated and watched to make sure he actually went in. So he's in the bathroom for almost 10 minutes, and the guard in the hall notices but doesn't change anything about his routine. While the patient was in the bathroom, no camera, he stripped completely down, lubed up his entire body in a thick layer of hand soap and water, and the now fully lubricated patient, I imagine, took a deep breath and flung open the door as hard as he could. The camera files show the seated guard almost falling back out of his rolling chair in surprise. He hadn't even come to terms with the fact that he was going to have to grab a curiously shiny au naturel man when the guy made 5 long strides down the hall at full speed and turned the corner toward the waiting room. The patients in the waiting room just froze in shock, and the guards by the entrance and exit started running toward him. Half a dozen nurses and half a dozen security guards grabbed at him with gloved hands, but every single one of them came up with nothing. None of them could get in front of him, and any attempt to grab the lubed-up streaker failed. Some guards were holding their heads, mouthing, "What the frick?" and others were in full sprint after him. He made it in under 30 seconds out of the hospital and out of the sidewalk that led to the parking garage. He made it all the way to his car, but no further. You see, his keys were in his pants. In short, undressed patient under observation, greased up their entire body in the bathroom and slipped away from security and sprints through the ER to his car, but doesn't have his keys. My God, he must have been embarrassed. What do you even do when you're at that point? Walk back in and apologize? Ask if you can reset and try again? Great story, though. Years ago, when I worked overnight in retail, we had a guy take a Hallmark bag out of the gift card aisle, fill it to the brim with pregnancy tests, and then head towards the exit. He did this big looping arm swing to get the bag over the security antennas, but it didn't work. When the alarm went off, he broke into a run with his arm still straight up and slammed into the entrance door face first while simultaneously sidearm punching the door lintel above his head. He made it out with most of the loot, though. Left behind 3 or 4 pregnancy tests on the floor and some very nice face and fist prints. My coworker and I spent the next months arguing about what he could possibly want with that many pregnancy tests. The most popular theory was that he wanted to be really sure about something, but personally I think he just planned to sell them at a discount to a bodega somewhere. Haha, this reminds me of a story when I was a teenager and the PS2 came out. Me and some friends watched a guy shove one in the front of his pants with the box and everything and try to casually walk out of the front door. When he knew he was busted, he tried to run, but it turned into a weird waddle where he fell face first onto the pavement. I've got 2 decent ones. This is at our backup data center in the suburbs in a commercial office park. Dead quiet, no one even there. Cops mostly chill in the parking lot to sleep, basically. During lunch, this one guy parks in the back and starts eating his lunch. Then the door opens, he runs into the back of the truck, runs back to the door to grab the bag from his lunch, drops his pants, and lets loose a torrent of brown. He just explodes in the middle of the parking lot. There was no way those pants remained unscathed. Then he wipes his butt with his lunch bag. What lunch did he have, you might ask? It was from Portillo's. Personally, I love Portillo's. That bag did not deserve the fate it was given. This was an amazing video and captivated the entire IT staff of like 50 people for at least an hour of reruns. Another time we hired a cleaning service to clean that same office. A guy shows up in a really crappy car, like 18 years old, and parks in back. He then pulls out a giant glass pipe and goes to town for about 10 minutes. We were watching this and laughing, and we call up our man on site, and when this kid comes inside to work, we ask our employee, what does he smell like? So we called up the firm that sent him. It's a small business. Our guy knows the owner, actually. So we're listening to this one side of the conversation, and it goes like this. Hey, Bob, so the cleaning guy showed up. Yep, he's here. Hey, let me ask you something. Do you know this guy really well? Oh, So he's your son. Well, this is awkward. What are your all-you-can-eat buffet horror stories? I boss at a slightly nicer restaurant. On Fridays and Saturdays, we offer a prime rib and crab leg buffet, among a salad bar, hot and cold entrees, and a dessert bar. It's honestly pretty nice, and our buffet runner keeps anyone from doing ungodly things to the buffet. But the one incident that will always stand out to me was when this family of 5 came in. From the moment they came in to the moment they left, they ate as many crab legs as they possibly could. Their server and I were clearing plates off as fast as we could, but every time we'd return it, it seemed like another mountain of crab leg shells would appear in front of each member of that family. I know not how they ate so much, and I honestly can't recall if they ate anything besides the crab. Piles upon piles of shells were left upon the table after they left. It was truly a sight to behold. What's more is after I wiped down the table and came back with settings, I had to get another rag to wipe down the table again because something in the crab leg juice combined with our sanitizer and left a nice milky residue upon the table. Delicious. When I leave this job, I'll never be able to look at crab legs the same way. I had a buddy who was 400 pounds and the guy could put away some food. He went to a casino buffet that was one of the higher-end ones that had crab legs and steak. On his 4th or 5th plate stacked full of crab legs, the manager came out and gave him $250 in free slot play to leave the buffet. There were 2 other guys there and none of them were under 300 pounds. They killed a metric frick ton of food between them, and my friend was putting those other 2 guys to shame. The buffet was higher end, so it was $50 a person, but they easily all ate probably 3 to 4 times that, and my friend probably ate 8 to 10 times worth that in food. He then went on to win just over $100 with that free slot play as well. If you can't beat the casinos at the games, beat them at the bar or buffet. It would have been sick if it held out for more. The frick you talking about, boss? I'm just getting started. I'm gonna surf and turf this motherfricker into the ground unless I see 4 of those vouchers. Years ago, I worked at an all-you-can-eat country buffet in South Carolina. I was a busboy. One day I went to a table. It was a mess, as per usual. It looked to be a large family or group of families of about 12 people or so. The thing that stuck in my memory, though, is that whenever they'd finished with what they were going to eat, they'd scrape their plate and use it again. Scrape their plates onto the floor next to the chairs. So next to each chair there was a 6 to 18-inch pile of chicken bones, crab legs, mashed potatoes, and remnants of baked potatoes, among other things. It was just disgusting. I mean, I know that this was a thing that feasting nobles supposedly did in the Middle Ages, or maybe that was throwing the bones over the shoulders? I just don't understand how this time-traveling Duke and his family ended up in South Carolina of all places. A woman came in with 2 of her kids and had a pretty regular meal. You pay when you leave at our place, and she decided to sneak out with her younger daughter before paying, leaving her underage son alone at the table. We caught on pretty quickly and sent someone after her, who found her in her car in the parking garage, waiting for her son to come as well. She refused to come back and pay, so we had to keep her son hostage until the police came to handle the situation. What some people will do to their kids, I swear. We also found out from her son that she'd stolen one of the manager's key cards and they'd regularly come into the hotel and use the card to go swimming on the top floor pool. She was smart, I'll give her that, but still. My first job was as a dishwasher in an all-you-can-eat fried catfish buffet. People are animals, especially the ones that get far more food off the buffet than they can eat. Then they take the leftovers and pile them on a plate or tray, cover it in ketchup or tartar sauce, then pour their iced tea over the top of that. A lot of the people who did that got at least 2 plates like that a night. Nothing made me hate people like bussing or dishwashing on buffet night at the pizza place I worked at in college. What the frick? Serving the after-church crowd is pretty high up there, though. Jesus Christ himself would have never changed a dirty diaper on the table and left it there, okay, lady? I went as a customer to a Golden Corral. I'm walking to the chocolate fountain and 3 little girls stepped in front of me and all 3 of them just went hands deep in the fountain. The family was the first table by the fountain and all they did was laugh about how cute it was. Employees turned it off immediately. Say what you will about Golden Corral, but they definitely don't play around when it comes to their chocolate fountains. Feels like every story that I hear about them is, fountain was closed because some little crapbag decided to Augustus Gloop the thing. Sure, you might find boogers in their meatloaf, but if someone sneezes on the fountain side of the restaurant, that thing gets shut down like it's Madagascar. The buffet where I live got shut down for serving coyote meat and labeling it as other meats. I picked up some fish and chips recently. I saw that they had all-you-can-eat on Wednesdays. So I asked, what's the most that someone ever… and I was cut off. 18 pieces of fish and 3 plates of fries every single Wednesday, she said, holding up this huge platter to demonstrate the plate size for the chips. So he eats that exact order every week? Yep, and then he goes to different all-you-can-eats every day of the week. He got banned from the Chinese place down the road. My parents owned an all-you-can-eat buffet and I was there every day of my life from 4 a.m. to 2 p.m. My favorite horror story is when a couple came in to eat, obviously. They loved crab legs and every time my mum puts them out, they took everything. Also, just a reminder, crab legs are expensive. Forget the other customers, these two just took it and ate it all. So they're there for maybe 2 hours now and it's getting dark. They've eaten through at least a week's stock of crab legs and my mum finally decides it's enough. She stops putting it out in the buffet and brings individual plates to the customers who wanted it but couldn't get any due to this couple. The couple was livid. They literally flipped the chairs at their table, flipped their plates, bowls, cups, and completely trashed their area. Food was all over the floor, the tables, the chairs. Sticky soda was dripping into the carpet. They left in a hurry, but someone caught their license plate. We called the cops, and I think they charged them with something. I can't remember the aftermath details clearly because I was probably 8 or 9 years old. I'm 20 now. I just remember looking at the mess and feeling really angry that my sister and I had to clean it up with our mum. It was a family-run business, so we didn't have much help. Anyway, that's my horror story. The end. We had a Chinese buffet shut down for a health code violation, which was the employee was cutting veggies while taking a dump. To this day, I still wonder if that means the guy brought a bucket into the kitchen or veggies into the crapper, and honestly, I don't know which is worse. At one point, myself and 2 other family members worked at a Golden Corral, each in a different section, because small towns don't have a lot of job options for high school or college-age kids. I worked in the bakery, which was surprisingly low in horror stories other than the chaos that remained after a large group of children came through. My brother worked the steak section. He got these regulars who would tip him pretty well if he'd prepare blue steaks for them. The very idea of ordering blue steaks from a buffet just, makes me gag. My cousin worked the salad bar. Management would require her to keep seafood items on the bar for long after the point where they'd be safe to consume. I think the record was chilled shrimp from Mother's Day that stayed for over a week and a half. They finally caved and let her toss them when a customer complained about the smell. Oh, sweet God. And the fact that they didn't change the buffet until then implies that people were happily eating the shrimp there right up until that point, and presumably chucking their guts out in the bathroom afterwards. That's our second Golden Corral mention here, a restaurant I hadn't heard of until today and will probably now steer clear of. Not a buffet, but I worked at a pizza bar/parlor that offered a lunch buffet of endless pizza. The lunch ran from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. This gentleman comes in, I think he was homeless. He serves up a sky-high plate of pizza and just goes to town. He stayed from the beginning to the very end to make sure he got his money's worth. Well, his body didn't appreciate being stuffed like a piñata of pizza. He got up and waddled fast to the bathroom, and next thing I know, I'm being told that he had liquid crap trailing behind him to the bathroom and inside the same room. I was informed by my boss about the incident. I told him I was just heading out for a break. I was not about to clean that up. Not a worker, but I went to Hometown Buffet, and the kid in front of me was slightly shorter than the buffet bar, but had his hands in the yellow jello, just massaging it. Then his mum came by and snatched him away, but didn't say anything while a guy came and made himself a bowl of jello. 10-year-old me was too appalled to say anything. I haven't eaten jello since then. I was once at an old country buffet, waiting patiently to get some mac and cheese. The kid in front of me piled his plate high and then started tapping the serving spoon to get all of the cheesy goodness free from the confines of the spoon. Once he was satisfied with his handiwork, he licked said spoon clean. I didn't have any mac and cheese and I haven't been back since. I didn't work at an all-you-can-eat buffet, but my sister did. The buffet itself was on the first floor, so you had to either take the stairs or the elevator to your seat. Once there was a lady who was carrying a tray with a whole lot of stuff on it downstairs. Glasses, plates, and a whole lot more junk. My sister asked the lady if she needed any assistance, to which the lady replied, "You assume because I'm fat I need help?" My sister didn't react. A few seconds later, the lady fell down the stairs, there was blood and food everywhere. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I had a coworker that briefly managed Orion's buffet. He said it was fairly common for people to gorge themselves and then purge in the restroom and start eating again so that they could get their money's worth. So I work in an all-you-can-eat using tablets. This is, according to my boss, based on a Japanese kind of restaurant. We serve mostly Asian food, from Chinese to Japanese and even some Korean. The premise is that people order their food in rounds and then we bring the food to their table when it's ready. We always warn customers beforehand that if they leave food behind because they ordered too much, they'll still have to pay, depends on what they left behind. We've seen people try the weirdest stuff if it comes to not paying. People dumping food in their handbags, people shoving it in their mouths, then going to the loo and flushing it, putting hair on it and blaming us for it. We've seen them pull this stuff on camera, and when we actually catch them doing it, they blame us for it and refuse to pay. Someone let it come down to the police to sort it out sometimes. There have been multiple occasions on which they were involved to solve the problem for just €5. I guess some people's greed has no extent. A college friend works at a Chinese buffet. He said they caught a regular dipping pizza in the wonton soup, like in the queue and not at his table and eating it right there at the buffet. Bite, dip, bite, dip, bite, dip. After the 4th time in a month he did it, management finally kicked him out. Not a worker, but I once saw a grown man have a childlike meltdown over the fact that he showed up to soup plantation too late and missed out on the biscuits and gravy. A long time ago, my mum and I picked a friend of hers up and we went to a local Chinese food buffet. This place had a thing where you could get a pound of food for $5 in a takeout container instead of sitting and eating at the restaurant if you want. So that was our plan. The 3 of us were browsing around the buffet line with our takeout containers, adding what we wanted to them, and then I noticed that my friend's mum was doing something frickin' disgusting. He was eating a chicken wing, like right in front of the buffet line, hiding his face behind his takeout container. And then he took the chicken bone and put it back in the buffet tray. I walked over to my mum and told her what he was doing, and at first she thought I was joking. So she walked over to him and now he's standing there eating a slice of watermelon right off the buffet and then putting the rind back in the tray. So my mum was like, "What the frick are you doing?" And he's like, "Oh, don't worry, I do this all the time. They never notice." Of course, both me and mum are panicking, worried that they're going to call the cops or something because of this idiot. We basically pretended not to know him and continued to fill up our containers the right way. After a couple of minutes, one of the employees walks up to my mum and tells her that they noticed what the guy was doing, and they noticed we were also uncomfortable about it and didn't intend to blame us. But they warned her that if she doesn't get him to pay for the food in his container and to leave immediately, they'll be calling the cops. So of course my mum tells him that we need to go, and he just brushes it off like, "I don't care, they're not going to do anything." Well, me and my mum walked up to the front, paid for our containers, apologized, and walked out and left him there. A minute later, you could see and hear him shouting at the staff. He throws his container on the ground and food splatters everywhere. He storms out, shouting insults as he leaves, and of course gives them a, "I'm never coming back." To which they reply, "You're not allowed in here no more, we'll call the cops." So we're standing out by the car waiting for him, and of course we yell at him for being a piece of crap. We get in the car, and the next thing you know, this mother fricker starts pulling chicken wings and Chinese donuts out of his frickin' pockets and eating them. We dropped him off at home and never spoke to him again. That is the definition of one of those moments in life where you realize that you need new friends. I have to believe that maybe you hadn't hung out with him that much before if you didn't realize that something was a bit quirky about him. I managed a buffet in a casino in Reno for a few months. Had this family come in, mum, dad, 2 little kids. I got called over to the table because the mum had chucked up on her plate the table and wanted us to take it away and clean things up. I asked if she was okay, and she said she always blows chunks when she eats cheese. She had gotten herself an enchilada. It was a Mexican theme night. What the frick, lady? Enchiladas pretty much always have cheese. I told her I'd have to call janitorial because none of my staff was trained to handle biohazards. She didn't understand why I couldn't just take it. Janitorial came and couldn't clean up because she refused to move from the table, so janitorial left. She calls me over and starts yelling at me. Dad starts yelling too. Apparently she wanted to keep eating after chucking up, which I thought was really gross. I had them sit at another table so they could all keep eating. Janitorial came back and cleaned the other table. Finally, they go to leave and decide to make a huge scene in front of the restaurant and demand their money back. I refuse. The dad gets in my face and starts shouting that I'm just a racist white B-word and his wife makes loads more money than I do. I call security and they storm out, pulling pictures off the wall and shattering them on the floor. And Dad also picked up a vase and broke it. The 2 kids were running around and banging on the walls. Security finally shows up after they ran off. I had to do a report, and they were put on the 86 list. I frickin' hate people. I was standing behind a woman at a hometown buffet. She was getting lasagna or something, basically a really cheesy pasta thing that when you lift the serving utensil, a lot of cheese hangs on. I witnessed her lift her pasta, twirl all the excess cheese that was connected around her index finger, and there was a lot, clip it off with her thumbnail, and then fling it back into the pasta dish. I knew I shouldn't have been at Hometown Buffet in the first place, but this solidified my stance to never go back. I worked as a server at a Chinese buffet, and 4 things come to mind instantly. First, a middle-aged woman who chucked up on her table and blamed it on giving herself the wrong insulin dose. The 4 mountains of food she destroyed probably contributed too. Profusely apologized and tipped me $1. 2, I tried to pick up a dirty plate off a table that had a big pile of hibachi sauce and grease on it. The customer stopped me and said, "That's the best part," and then proceeded to drink the sauce like it was the milk after a bowl of cereal. A young mother complained to me because the crab meat and cheese that we serve on the buffet made her child sick and they threw up. Her child was an infant, not even a year old. I'm no childcare expert, but baked artificial crab meat and mozzarella can't be good for a baby. The restaurant was also raided by ICE one morning shortly before opening. The entire back of house and one of our managers were deported. Back of the house was half Chinese and half Latin American. I was just a witness, but I saw how a woman came in with about 5 kids and she made them all sit at a table while she got food, even if they seemed old enough to get it themselves. She just grabbed 2 trays, placed 3 plates on both of them, and literally poured all the chicken nuggets onto one plate, so it was a huge mountain. She did the same to the other 5 dishes and left 5 pans that were full or almost full before she came, empty. Needless to say, people were annoyed, especially when she did it multiple times with other dishes, and would glare at people if she saw them taking food from dishes that she probably wanted. At one point, I worked for a pizza place that used to have a day buffet that I'd make pizzas for. One time, 2 huge guys came in the moment we opened for the buffet. The manager on duty dropped the first 2 pizzas down on the buffet, turned to grab the next 2, turned back, and both pizzas were gone. A few minutes later, both guys walked back up and each took an entire pizza again and walked back to continue eating. They proceeded to do this over and over, grabbing an entire pizza each for themselves for the entire 3 hours that we were offering the buffet. That was one hell of a day. Okay, and to answer some of the questions I'm being asked, they were big as in morbidly obese, and Pizza Hut 2011 with regular dough. Not thin crust, medium pizzas, which were 12 inches, you get the idea. I used to work at an all-you-can-eat buffet. I'd usually be the one who cleans up after people once closing hours had passed. Essentially, I was the de facto janitor of the place. This one time, I had to clean the bathrooms after the place closed. No problems in the female bathrooms, but when I went into the male restroom, the image was burned into my retina instantly. An old man was lying on the floor, face down in a puddle of muck. Not just any sewage muck, but opaque black muck. It had the color of motor oil. It smelled awful too, like a mixture of doo-doo and rotting durian. It certainly didn't help that the liquid wasn't just smeared all over the floor, but spread across the walls too. There were frickin' handprints across the wall, presumably when the geezer was trying to stand himself up. I peered into the toilet. There was more of that brown liquid, along with chunks of corny doo-doo. There's also this fluid in your digestion called chyme. It's basically the thing right before food turns into brown, the pulpy, acidic liquid with partially digested food in it. I could see scraps of chicken breast and sauce mixed in there with the pulpy chyme. As for the old guy, well, it turns out he didn't merely faint, he had actually deceased. I was in a room with a fresh, decomposing body in the stages of algor mortis. He had his pants off, presumably he had crapped himself to death, but I don't know. The guy had emptied himself like one of those cement mixers you'd see in a cartoon, except you just replace the cement with a liquid that embodies death itself. Needless to say, I, like him, emptied my digestive contents, just from the opposite end that he did. After that, I quit. Screw that place, man. There was a fairly expensive restaurant in Dallas in the 80s called Southern Kitchen. About $25 per person back then with the food served to the table. Really good stuff. They were famous for cinnamon rolls. The owner said he'd seen many women ruin expensive purses hiding those rolls. Man, I miss that place. The professor of my college microbiology class was also a director at the state health department in charge of inspecting restaurants. The first thing she told us on day 1 was never, ever eat at an all-you-can-eat buffet. What out-of-control situation did nobody call emergency services about? My co-worker's story of how he found out he had a heart defect jumps out for me. He used to ride his bike to work all the time at his old job. One day, just on his road to work, he drops on the side of the road, fainting. He was out for an hour or so before he came to. He was pretty beat up, nothing major but cuts and bruises everywhere. When he came to, no one was around him. People were just driving by and walking around. No one stopped to help, no one stopped to call an ambulance. He went to the doctor and got surgery done for an artificial heart valve. This one was only a few years back. Driving along a suburban road one night, and a guy wearing only his undies ran up to our cop car and threw a very large sofa cushion at us. As we slowed down to find out why he had thrown said cushion, he tried to jump into the back of the car. We got out and had a chat with the poor guy, who told us that he'd used about an 8-ball of poor quality booger sugar and wanted to get our attention to help him. Kicker was, he'd been running around the suburban streets all crazed for about 30 minutes, and nobody thought it was odd enough to call us. To be fair, it wasn't the nicest area. I was responding to a disturbance call in a trailer park that turned out to be BS. As I was leaving, I noticed a giant puddle of blood on the ground near a different trailer. Upon further inspection, I realized that there was blood all over one of the doors, complete with smeared handprints and blood dripping off the doorknob. It looked like a frickin' massacre. I started pounding on the door, and then this junkie comes out and starts yelling at me for waking her up. I ask her if she's hurt, and she said she wasn't. She then proceeds to go nuts about all the blood. She has no idea where it came from. I followed the ungodly amount of red stuff to a trailer about a block down where there was a giant party taking place. I ask the group of guys standing outside where the injured person is, and they all go G-code on me and say that they don't know what I'm talking about, while standing in the blood trail. I push past and continue down the road to Oz, where at the end of it I find a guy in what used to be an all-white outfit that's now dark red attempting to control his massive head bleed on his own. I later discovered that he'd been trying to break into that other trailer when he drunkenly cut his head on the window that he broke out. That's an awful lot of blood loss. I can't imagine blocking off authorities from that sort of medical emergency, no matter how much you distrust the popo. Wild. There was a quadruple murder in a residential area here in Sweden back in 1980, with several witnesses that heard and saw the incident. The attacker shot a girl by accident and then shot another guy in the following moments. They fired a total of 12 shots over the course of several hours. Shanked 2 others to death with a kitchen knife, he finished everything off with dragging the girl outside because he felt guilty for killing her, so that someone would find her and call the paramedics, but realized while dragging her that she was gone and nothing could be done, so he threw her down an elevator shaft. The whole ordeal lasted for 4 hours and nobody called the cops, even though 12 shots were fired and screams were heard. The killer was arrested 2 days later and was killed 18 years later by the son of the first guy that got killed. Former law enforcement officer. I worked a late shift and was driving home and decided to stop for some breakfast at a Waffle House. I noticed a few people flagging me down as I pulled into the parking lot, which was shared by an auto repair shop. They pointed me to the back, so I pulled over and turned my spotlight on. On the back side of the repair shop, there was a dumpster, and there was a man laying down beside it behind the fence. I could see his feet. Then another homeless man walked out with a bowl and literally walked right by my car towards the Waffle House. This guy was soaked, by the way. So I walked over to the man laying down and he was unresponsive. I call in and the EMTs arrive and this guy is definitely gone. I still have to this day no idea how or why. I have the homeless guy waiting for me next to the Waffle House and I ask him what happened and said, "He was out cold. I was pouring water on him to keep him warm." Video from the auto shop shows the guy walking and collapsing next to the dumpster. He wasn't shot or anything, so who knows? Heart attack, stroke, something. And then just laying there for 45 minutes. The homeless guy walked over to a water hose beside the Waffle House, filled a bowl up and poured water on him because it was slightly cool outside and didn't want him to get too cold. The water was from a cold faucet, by the way. Literally nothing ever came close to the weirdness of that night in my entire career. Paramedic here. My partner and I were at our post, which was in the parking lot of a strip mall that had a bunch of stores and one bar, which was known to be pretty sketchy. My partner was taking a little nap. It was around 1 a.m., and I was watching a movie on my phone, waiting for a call. Eventually, I notice a few people coming out of the bar and just sort of lingering in the parking lot. A few more people come out, one lights up a cigarette, and they all just stand around. I go back to my movie, and 20 minutes later I notice that there's now a much larger group lingering outside of the bar. Nothing strange was happening, but I thought it was weird that they'd been there for so long, so I decided to check it out. I woke up my angry partner to have him pull our rig closer to the group. As we approach with our lights on, the group notices us and starts to break apart. A few people scatter and I see that in the middle of the group there's a person on the ground motionless. My partner and I jump out and ask what's going on. Someone in the group goes, "This guy is wasted, man. He just stumbled out here and fell asleep on the ground." I shout to the man on the ground and he doesn't respond. I check for a pulse and there is none. I start CPR while my partner gets out our jump bag and notifies dispatch. For a full 30 minutes, people had just stood around looking at this dead guy on the ground, some smoking cigarettes and none doing anything about it. There wasn't even a noticeable commotion. No one asked if he had needed help or called anyone, and they probably never would have. The guy was cool to the touch by the time we got to him and down for at least 30 minutes. We went through the motions, but there was no saving him. We transported and he was pronounced at the hospital within 15 minutes. How frickin' hard is it to ask someone if they're okay or dial 911? How was not a single person in that group not alarmed by seeing a man sleeping on the ground in a parking lot? I've had similar variations of this scene happen at least 3 times while on duty. People just don't give a frick. Part of my job is to inspect and investigate issues in child and daycare centers. Staff members duct-taped a 1-year-old toddler to a chair because they wouldn't sleep at nap time. One staff member witnessed the other staff do this to the child. 3 other staff saw the child taped to the chair. The owner saw it as well. No one said anything or reported to the police. My office is civil, not criminal. I called the local jurisdiction and submitted all the documentation I'd found. The parent picked up the child and couldn't figure out why the child's clothes had sticky residue on them. Boy, was she surprised when she'd learned what happened to her baby. This is pretty common where I work. No one calls the police. Probably the most extreme was a shots fired call, extremely common on a certain street that we don't really go down without backup. We drive through and don't see anything, then maybe 10 minutes later we get an anonymous call about a shootout inside a vacant house. We find the door wide open, covered in blood. We make entry and find an absolute bloodbath. Blood, drugs, and casings everywhere. We recover a piece that had been fired, and there was evidence people had been dragged out. We only got the 1 call about it and no one showed up at the hospital later, shot. The narrator did do a bit of digging to see where this author was from, and all I can say, it's wild enough that this can happen anywhere in the world without injured or deceased persons showing up on some sort of register, and the fact that it can happen in a first world country is even more mind-blowing. Where the frick are our social priorities at? I'm not in law enforcement anymore, but I was for about 12 years in a large city. When I was a patrolman, I got a call about someone firing off fireworks in a strip mall at 2 a.m. These were common calls, so we'd usually just go to check the area and clear the call. I checked the parking lot and didn't find anything, but I noticed the lights were on at one of the strip mall businesses. I won't say what business it was, but it was owned by a pretty prominent local businessman. Anyways, I go out to check and found the front door unlocked, which in itself was suspicious. We had a lot of burglaries in that area, so I asked dispatch to call a rep for the business. I was clearing the building and found the owner and several other people, all really prominent, in a back room where a poker table was set up. One of the guys was sitting down and had a pile of coats on his lap, which was really weird, and he was acting like he was in pain. I saw blood droplets under his chair and asked him what was wrong. He broke down and moved the coats and then revealed he had a massive bullet wound in his thigh. Long story short, these guys had a high-stakes poker game every week and someone tried to rob it and things went sideways. The guy robbing it shot this guy in the leg, which some citizen heard and called in a fireworks call. The guys involved in the game weren't going to call the cops and were arranging to have a doctor come in and treat him off the books because gambling is illegal in the state that I worked in, but we honestly wouldn't have given a crap. We actually caught the guy that did it, but the DA wouldn't prosecute because the victim and witnesses didn't want to testify or be involved. The victim recovered fine. One of the guys who I interviewed told me they were robbed of over 30 grand. Oh, there are so many. There's the usual drive-by shootings, gang violence and stuff. Then there's the infuriating things like the domestic matters. Though, to be completely honest, the most absurd situation in which no one called the police or 911 was when my crazy neighbors across the street had their father-in-law have a heart attack on their front lawn during a barbecue. The guy's son was having the mother of all tantrums, shoving people, screaming, rolling on the ground, pulling up grass. They literally broke a window, all while shrieking at the top of his voice, "Please God, don't take my dad!" The other relatives allowed this spectacle to unfold before their eyes while they formed a semicircle around this dude's seemingly lifeless body. I finally looked out of my window, opened it, and shouted if anyone had called 911. I got about 20 blank stares. I called for them, and the crazy son tried to attack the paramedics while they were loading his dad into the ambulance. Called the cops for them as well. Common sense just really isn't all that common as it turns out. The dad didn't make it. The party just resumed once the son got carted off in cuffs and the ambulance had left. The son was definitely old enough to know better. He was in his early to mid-30s at the time of his tantrum. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Started my 4 to midnight shift by heading directly to get a coffee. Beautiful summer, people everywhere. I pull into the parking space and see a guy just lying on the ground in front of a park bench. I jumped out of my cruiser, grabbed my first aid bag, and called it in. The guy was conscious but not really responsive. It sounds like a movie, but we were doing the old blink if you can hear me deal. The rescue finally arrived and took him to the hospital. I found out later that the guy had suffered a grand mal seizure and was still postictal when I rolled up on him. The frustrating part was the dozens of people milling around that couldn't even bother themselves to call 911, never mind find out if the guy was okay. There was a video a while back, and I'm sure other similar ones floating around, of a woman in public transit who appeared to be on something. Swaying side to side, drooling, spaced out look. People were making nasty comments and her young daughter was crying hysterically. Turns out the lady was having a seizure. No one wanted to get involved to see if she was okay. It was easier to say nasty things and film her. Seizures aren't always falling on the ground and flailing. They can include symptoms that look like the person is on something. People with diabetes can also have similar reactions with low blood sugar. My brother-in-law was on his way home from the night shift a few months ago and happened to drive past a house that was just casually on fire. He ran up to the door, beat on it with no answer, broke the door down, and ended up rescuing a woman and her children. I'm not sure how many kids there were. They were all fast asleep and had no idea the house was on fire. My apartment got broken into a few years ago. It was one of those off-campus college apartments. We called the police, who came at about 4:30 a.m. Our neighbors were playing loud music, which was pretty typical for them. When they arrived, they were taking the report when the officer I was talking to asked if our neighbors were always that loud, and I told him it was only on Saturday and Thursdays, and how it didn't really bother us. But before the cops left, they knocked and pounded until the neighbors finally answered. When they opened the door, there was a horse or donkey in the living room, several studio cameras, and 3 or 4 people who were apparently filming a donkey show. I know those cops were probably expecting some green herb and maybe a few minors drinking, but not a frickin' donkey show. You know, given how a lot of these other stories have gone, I was expecting a dead body, maybe an untreated medical episode happening ignored in the middle of the floor. I didn't expect that, so well done, guys. I do mountain bike patrol in a small, medium-sized city. Was just riding one morning just after rush hour and I spotted a little kid, probably about 3 or 4 years old, standing on the side of the road with no parents in sight. I stopped and asked him where his parents were, and he just kinda shrugged. Called it in, and some guy ran out of some townhomes across the street and said the little dude was standing there for a few hours and the guy in the house was watching him to keep an eye on him. There were people around and everything, but we never got a call for it. Long story short, this kid had just wandered out of the room he and his mum were staying in nearby and wandered onto the street. The place was a shelter for women, and he was able to get past the manager and a court police officer. The mum had passed away from too many substances 3 days prior, and when the little guy got hungry, he went out of the room and wandered out to the street. No one even went to check on her either, despite the smell. Because some people have asked, I'll clarify this shelter wasn't a homeless shelter, it was a shelter designed to house domestic victims. Women and children who temporarily had nowhere else to go. Mostly, it was designed to help bring them into the system by giving them a place to stay until their social workers and caseworkers could get them better accommodations. Kind of like a more secure hotel. The women were free to leave and do their own thing, and there wasn't a full-service staff like in a homeless shelter or rehab facility. To finish, please go out and push your legislators and the people in power to fix our healthcare and rehabilitation system. Many millions of people suffer from our lack of ability to help those in need, especially the mentally ill and the neglected members of our society. Push for the end of the war on substances to stop the cycle. I'm an EMT. We were waiting at a light right as we were headed back to the station for our end of the shift. We saw a man running like Usain Bolt across the crosswalk to beat the light and a woman chasing him. My partner and I both look at each other and he says, "She's gonna get hit." And sure as crap, the car in the rightmost lane just guns it as the light turns green, and the next thing we see is flip-flops flying and a pair of legs in the air. The female was plowed over and landed on her face in the street. We immediately turn on our lights and hop out of the ambulance. When we get to this lady, she's unconscious, she's gone number 1 in herself, and is bleeding from multiple lacerations on her limbs and a nasty head wound. My partner, who is a paramedic, starts his assessment as I go to grab a backboard and C-collar and call it into dispatch. She wakes up and immediately starts screaming about her boyfriend leaving her. She stands up and tries to run after him and face plants onto the curb and proceeds to lose a tooth. We finally calmed her down enough to get her onto the gurney. Mind you, she wouldn't listen and kept trying to walk around after suffering a couple of head injuries. Once we got her into the back of the ambulance and out of the road into a nearby parking lot, the driver that hit her rolls up. By now, firefighters are on the scene and asking what the heck is going on. We give them the lowdown and my partner tells them that we can handle it, so they leave, confused and somewhat trepidatious. We talk to this woman for a while, insisting that she needs to go to the hospital, but she keeps saying that she can't go and needs to find her boyfriend. Meanwhile, the driver who hit her is apologizing to me and saying that she wants to help any way she can. The woman keeps saying she can't go to the hospital. After we got her cleaned up and bandaged all the wounds, she asks if we can take her to her boyfriend's house. Well, as an EMT, I can do one of two things, either take you to the hospital or leave you where you are. She refuses transport vehemently, so my partner and I tell her we can't take her anywhere. She proceeds to then hop out of the ambulance and ask the driver who just hit her if she would take her to her boyfriend's house if she didn't call the cops. Sure as crap, before we can even radio in that the patient was refusing transport to the hospital, she's rolling away in the car that just hit her and tossed her 8 feet in the air. It's not the craziest story, but one of the few that we just happened to be there for. This is my uncle's story from early 90s Chicago. An elderly couple called in what they said sounded like a shot from the apartment below them. My uncle and his partner arrive on the scene and enter the apartment, weapons drawn. Standard protocol for a possible firefight in progress. Right in the entryway is what's left of a middle-aged Italian gentleman who apparently made the decision to not continue his criminal career by getting himself in the head with a .45. He's obviously gone. According to my uncle, his face was half gone, nose missing, one eye, and the other hanging from what's left of the socket. My uncle's partner goes out to the squad car to radio for the cleanup crew, those guys that come in and scoop up the dead bits, and my uncle is standing in the door making sure no one enters the apartment until they arrive. About 5 minutes pass and my uncle hears what sounds like something moving inside the apartment. He figures the guy probably has a cat or dog. Your pet will eat you if you die, and they are hungry, generally, so he heads to shoo it back away so it doesn't further damage this guy's body. He opens the door and the mother fricker with his face blown in half is standing there. My uncle reached for his sidearm and nearly shot the guy, genuinely thinking he was a zombie or something. And the dude just collapses again. Not like a fall into a slump sort of collapsed, like falling straight back and hitting the ground with a thud. My uncle, after regaining his composure, radios his partner to call for EMS, and then he proceeds to check the guy's pulse. Nothing. When EMS arrived, they said that there was no way the guy should have survived the initial shot, and they would have assumed he was dead too based on the amount of damage. My uncle says in his entire 20-year career, which included several firefights and car chases, that he never felt more scared than when he opened the door and saw that guy, who by all rights should have been dead, just standing there. After reading these posts, one particular instance comes to mind. While working for the MEO, we were called for a badly decomposed decedent. She was in the bathroom of a housing facility. Her remains had leaked into the air ducting and flooring. EMS had been called because someone had slipped and fallen on her liquefaction in the hallway. Look, I realize that a lot of these folks probably had bad run-ins with the police, but to let someone rot like that astounded me. You could smell it from outside the facility, and it took someone injuring themselves to have the authorities called. There's still a pic of me in a ghost suit on our local wall of shame because I ended up in the bathtub after almost adding myself to the injured list while slipping across the bathroom. I moved out of Racine, Wisconsin in the 90s because in the last 3 weeks I lived there were 24 drive-by shootings and 3 of those happened when there were already cops at the scene for unrelated reasons. I was off duty playing poker with some neighbors and friends. One of the guys at the table is a hard-as-nails Vietnam veteran. In the middle of a hand, he downs his glass of scotch, hits himself in the chest and lights a cigarette, stands up and says, "Well, I'm having a heart attack." He then walks out and drives to the hospital. Everyone thought he was joking. Sure enough, he had had and survived a heart attack. Years ago, I was at a wedding and the groom was a cop. There was one guest at the wedding who was the +1 of a friend of the bride. The reception was so much fun, with several hours of open bar at a big hotel. The +1 guest was walking around, inviting people to go out to his car to smoke some of the devil's lettuce. At one point, he walked up to a couple of guys and invited them, to which they responded, "No thanks, we're cops." Damn, that was a fun night. When did you stop, chuckle, and think to yourself, "I'm in danger"? When a car jumped the median and was barreling right towards me doing well over 70. Luckily, horsepower saved me from death. My first instinct was to floor it. At least have them hit the rear door and panels instead of the driver's side door. I was the only one in the car. When I was 7, I was playfully pushing a sheep and he pushed forward. Next thing I know, I'm against a wall, sheep head on my chest, and 5 seconds later I realize he's too strong for me. I literally thought I was going to die right there. Death by floof. Driving 50 miles per hour in a little VW Jetta and a huge SUV was stopped at a crossroad up ahead. Apparently they didn't see me and they started across the road. Thank God I hit the gas instead of the brake, or I probably would have T-boned them. Instead, they smashed my back left tire and sent me spinning to a stop in the opposite lane of traffic. It was also really lucky I had no oncoming cars in that moment. Funny though, I was so dazed I remember thinking, who was that screaming? I'm the only one in the car. Then I realized that it was me. Such a strange feeling. A homeless girl grabbed me from a bar and said she needed an ambulance because her friend had taken too much of something. I followed her and started phoning one. She led me to an abandoned building. All that was going through my mind was, someone needs help. When she led me to some stairs, she said we needed to go up them, and my brain finally kicked in and I realized it could easily be a trap. Even if it wasn't, I wasn't going to walk into a smack den, and I was far enough into the building where escape wasn't easy. I leaned over a candle and set my t-shirt on fire. I thought it was really interesting and turned to my friends, saying, "Hey, look everyone, my t-shirt's on fire." Fortunately, one of them had more presence of mind than I did and put it out. About 19,000 feet or 5.7 kilometers up in Tanzania. Felt incredibly drowsy while taking a rest and I started dreaming. The guide slapped me on the arm. "Don't sleep, you die." The chuckle and "I'm in danger" came when I realized I felt so awful that I might actually choose sleep anyway. It was altitude sickness. I chucked up my undigested breakfast 10 minutes later and felt a bit better. Yep, it takes resources for our bodies to turn food into energy. I'm a little concerned about what would happen if you were unable to eat because of the altitude though. Good thing you had a decent guide with you. They're there to save us adventure tourist idiots from ourselves. In Iraq in 2004, my unit was tasked with pushing from Hit to Fallujah in order to find and destroy Muqtada al-Sadr's Mahdi army. In one of the cities we cleared, we were about to assault a 5-story building that Intel had informed us was defended by more than 100 insurgents. We were stacked up outside a medium-high wall that surrounded the building, and I was carrying my saw, which is like a 20-pound weapon. I got a boost over the wall and immediately fell into and got stuck in a thorny bush. I remember thinking, oh man, what a stupid way to die, as I started waiting to get shot at. Turns out that this insurgent stronghold was actually a school with 2 friendly dudes in it. In short, Intel sucks. Later on in that same mission, we were doing a sneaky night patrol and we had to cross a highway that had crash barriers in lines on the median. I tried to roll over the barrier wearing a backpack, and it got perfectly lodged in the space between the barriers. Stuck there like a turtle while I tried to whisper shout to someone to come save me. A smackhead got out of prison and went to visit his girlfriend. She'd moved out about 2 years earlier and I'd moved in. So at 1 a.m. there's a clearly drunk nutjob, possibly also on substances, trying to break down my front door while my wife and kids are asleep, somehow. I hadn't put the bolts on the door yet as I was only just on my way to bed when he turned up. It was kind of funny, but I still got the cricket bat out just in case. Hey, the same thing happened to me. I was walking into my apartment building one day when I saw a guy start to walk in. I'd only been gone like 5 minutes, so I yelled at him, "Get the frick out of my apartment!" So this big Hispanic dude turns back towards me and says he's looking for so-and-so. I tell him they don't live here anymore, even though I occasionally get his junk mail. Big dude tells me he's fresh out of jail and the former resident owes him money. I tell him that's fine, but he doesn't live here anymore. He looks and tells me that my apartment looks like his and that if I'm covering for him, he'll be coming back. I tell the guy that's fine and that I won't see him later because once again, he doesn't live here. There was this time on a school bus, we had a new driver. The area is pretty hilly, and in this route we had the steep 50-foot drop from where the bus turned around with a 3-point turn. But the bus driver just kept backing up. Closer and closer, we almost went off the cliff. I'm sure that if we measured, it was within a foot. I started looking at exits, how fast I could run to the front or the side exit. Man, we were all screaming in terror. Good times. I took an out-of-bounds ski trail that looked fun by myself because intelligence is my strong suit. Came upon a tall cliff with a flat landing that I knew I couldn't make on skis, but I'd come too far to hike back to the main path. Took my skis off, tossed them over, and climbed down. Hurt my legs, but nothing serious. Continued on. Several minutes later, came upon a sign pointing towards a 20-kilometer bike trail ending God knows where. It was around that time I realized I could end up lost in the back country of a ski resort with no cell reception. Decided to hike in the opposite direction the sign was pointing since it was uphill and seemed more likely to take me back to the main trail. After several whispered swears and a good half hour of biking uphill, and across a sketchy-looking wooden bridge, through deep snow in ski boots holding my skis, I arrived at a populated ski run. I now make sure to have someone with me for all backcountry-related adventures. That way, if I die, I can bring them down with me. I was doing aid work in Croatia in the late 90s, only a few years after the war had ended. Our group was staying in a small village about an hour outside of Zagreb, which had been caught up in the conflict. Lots of shelled houses, mines in the countryside. Even the main bridge had been blown up, so residents had to use an army makeshift bridge if they wanted to cross the river. We'd made friends with the locals and they took us down to the river where we had a fun time swimming and mucking about. I totally underestimated the river current and my ability to swim. So I start trying to cross the river and the current just picks me up. Whoosh! And suddenly I'm on my butt trying to swim against it. No deal. When I realized this, I started trying to get footing, but I'm being swept downstream and my feet are literally hitting rocks, no grip at all. It seemed like forever, but it was probably about 5 to 10 seconds. I hit a shallow calm patch of the river where I could stand up. When the guys came over, they were telling me it was no big deal, but had I been swept a little bit further down the stream, I would have hit a heavily mined area and probably been blown to bits. I metaphorically crapped myself. That's the closest I've come to losing my life. Really shook me up. I worked as an animator in a hotel. During the season, the mini club daycare is filled with kids, but post-season there's not even one kid in the hotel. So, post-season, one older lady and one middle-aged guy entered the empty daycare. The lady quickly explained to me that this guy is her mentally disabled son, who's mentally around 3 or 4 years old. He saw the daycare and really wanted to play there. Usually I wouldn't accept that, but there were no kids around, so I was actually happy that I'll be occupied for a while. He was really endearing, and we often watched Mickey Mouse DVDs since he was a big fan. After a few days of me hanging out with him, his mother came to pick him up and asked me how he was. I replied that he was nice as always, to which she replied, "Good, because he can get so very violent and aggressive sometimes." It sent chills down my spine, realizing that I was lucky, but that he'll also be coming to the mini club for the rest of their vacation. So there I was, day after day, playing with this guy twice as big as me, completely alone, doing everything he wanted and being more than careful that he just didn't get mad. Look, I get that this elderly woman had spent her lifetime caring and providing for her son at this point, but maybe that's the sort of information you disclose up front if there's any danger involved. Don't just drop him off and peace out even if you feel you deserve to. It's a hard situation to judge people for, but I think at least some warning about moods was warranted. When I decided to explore some lava tubes on an extinct volcano, Rangitoto if you're curious. I did this with no torch and bad footwear. It was extremely dark in there with no cell phone reception. I got completely disoriented and had to feel my way out because my phone was not as bright as I thought. No one knew where I was and I could have been in serious trouble. Stupidest thing that I've done recently. Me and my good friend Felix, both German, were traveling with an Interrail ticket through Europe. In Serbia, we were in a train which was going really slow and stopping at every really little town and village. For some reason, the train got shorter and shorter every other station because they were uncoupling a wagon here and there. So everyone moved to the first 2 wagons because they were most likely to arrive at the final destination. Felix and I were already in the second wagon in a closed cabin where there's a bench on the left and right. We were both sitting on the left bench having a cigarette when things suddenly got intense. 3 obviously drunk men came into that cabin. At first, they only asked for a cigarette, which we gave them, but after a few minutes, they started discussing more and more intensely. I could feel they were talking about us. So I asked Felix, whose father is Serbian, if he could understand them. He was pretty serious at that moment and told me that the two of them wanted to rob us, and one wanted to wait until after the train ride. Felix gave me a continuous update about what they were talking about. They were guessing how much money we might have and still discussing when to do the robbery. Their discussion heated up, and at one point they stopped completely. I was wondering what happened, and then suddenly it all went black. We were in a frickin' tunnel. I was totally flexed and expected to get the crap beaten out of me. They were only talking like 3 sentences. I asked Felix, "Are they going to do it now?" He said, "I'm not sure." After what felt like 10, but probably was 2 minutes, the light came back and I was sitting there like a frickin' Jackie Chan on my bench, prepared to fight in the dark. They knew now that we kind of knew. They decided to follow us once we got to our destination so we could kind of chill during the ride. At our destination, we just sprinted into the next taxi and told him to go to the next city as fast as possible. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Calling an Uber in Houston right in the middle of a downpour. As a Brit who was staying there for work, I was only vaguely aware of the dangers of flash flooding, and being from a country with no real inclement weather, I obviously didn't take it as seriously as I should have. As Texas natives will no doubt confirm, when it rains hard there. At least it did that morning. I remember trying to call an Uber on the app, and a few drivers in a row cancelled on me. I was desperately trying to get back to my friend's house. I'd just spent the night with a woman, and I was doing the walk of shame. She did offer me to stay and wait it out at her place, but the rain wasn't too bad at that point and only really became dangerous midway through my journey home. It really did come out of nowhere and she couldn't have known. In any case, it would have been beyond awkward to hang around the whole day with someone I'd literally just met 12 hours previously. I would have swum home through gator-infested waters if I'd had to, so I didn't really have much choice and just persisted in requesting a driver. The guy who eventually did show up was a friendly Nigerian fellow who probably didn't really consider how dangerous it was. In the short journey from the front door to the cab, I got so soaked it looked like I'd been thrown in a lake. We were both chuckling like, haha, look at all this rain, until it got so bad that we literally couldn't see 1 yard in front of the car. By this point, we were on the freeway and basically trapped. And then we both started getting alerts on the Uber app that we were in a danger zone and to vacate immediately. Then we saw the water rising on the side of the freeway and cars starting to lose control. That's when both of our smiles dropped and it was like, oh yeah, people die in these conditions. We both might not be going home today. It probably sounds silly to people who have to deal with all this stuff all the time, but that was the only time in my life I've experienced the genuine fear of, there's a very real danger I could either drown or be sleeping in a community center this evening. Eventually, he did get me home and I've never been so grateful. He got a big tip from me and a hug. Decided to go on a day hike in a 17,000-acre wilderness area that I'd never visited before. Didn't tell anyone my plans, didn't take a map, didn't pack anything more than a Cliff Bar and a water bottle. There was no cell service and I didn't see anyone else all day. The trail system turned out to be pretty complex, and after a couple of hours I realized I was entirely lost. I tried to keep my panic down and kept just picking trails and walking until around dusk, where I happened to pop out onto a dirt road and was able to follow that road a couple of miles back to my car. I still kick myself for that one. I don't know what the frick I was thinking. At my best friend's going away party, drunker than I've ever been before or since, barely able to stand, when the bros collectively decided to pick me up and throw me in the pool. All I could do was grab a nearby screen door with one white-knuckled hand. The host is a big burly musclehead who'd just made sergeant. He stopped them and told them they were idiots. I was too drunk to swim, clearly. And then I blacked out. At first, the narrator was confused as to why a screen door was in the pool unless this was some kind of budget Titanic-themed party. Then I realized that you never actually made it to the pool, which in hindsight is probably a very good thing for everyone involved. When I was in med school and did my psych rotation, the first thing we were told was to never split up from our partner, so just in case of a dangerous situation with a patient, we'd have a second person there to help. I went to do an assessment on a patient, he seemed perfectly normal, and my partner judged that now would be a good time to use the restroom. The patient and I were having a pleasant-as-could-be conversation. He asks me to look at his drawings, which he had proudly hung up on the wall. I obliged, I like art as much as the next girl. I look and they're really nice. Then I turn around and find that the second thing we were told never to do, which is let the patient get between us and the doorway, had happened. And he was not seeming so friendly anymore, which is when I thought to myself, Well, darn it, if I'm in a pickle now. This man is telling me he has to get out of here. I have to help him. And all of I don't even hear what at this point because I'm realizing how potentially screwed I am. But then I realized that I'd also done the third thing which we were told never to do, which was to keep our cell phones on us on the floor. I was just hoping at this point that I could keep this guy talking a little while I call my preceptor to save my dumb butt. My friend was at the same clinical site the following semester, and the preceptor used that as a cautionary tale to emphasize the first two rules and get rid of the third one. I swam from a beach out to a buoy, not even that far, maybe 200 meters from the beach. I'm a strong swimmer, so I thought I'd manage it easily. Something about the cold water and the current? I don't know, I was really struggling coming back with even trying to swim horizontally to the beach. I went all lightheaded and felt really tired, then just started thinking that this is it, I'm gonna drown, and how stupid I've been. Floated there for a bit, laughed to myself like a maniac about how dumb I was dying like this. Eventually, I snapped out of it and started swimming again. Ended up crawling back onto the beach. My partner asked how the sea was, and I just croaked, "Fine." We were on a patrol in Afghanistan in 2008 when we came under heavy fire. Our fire team took cover behind a low, loose stone and mud wall, unable to return any effective suppressing fire. The wall was slowly getting lower and smaller as it was peppered by small arms fire, and we knew that air support was coming, but it felt like we were in some crappy Indiana Jones scene. In those situations, it's the humor that stops you from crapping yourself. Me and my friend were scaling a cliff. He wanted to go around, which would take about an hour. I said we could climb it. Fast forward 10 minutes and I'm hanging off a cliff, 30 feet tall, and hanging onto it for dear life with two hands. I found the situation quite funny. I was so confident in my ability to climb it, and I lost my footing just as I got to the top. I was holding onto the rock for what felt like forever, most likely less than 2 minutes, until he managed to climb up and pull my butt up there. It was 3 years ago, I believe, when I was still in active service in Switzerland. I'm part of a tank crew. That day I was the designated loader for the cannon. We were doing live fire exercises, and as we fired, one of the gas extractor seals blew up. What this is, basically, is a circular rubber ring around the gas tube of the cannon. If you look up a Leopard A2 tank, it's the thick tube at the base of the cannon. It acts as a seal to prevent smoke backlash into the crew compartment, and instead vents it outside. This meant that the sealed crew compartment filled up with smoke and the acrid smell of cordite and essentially blinded us all. So here I am, a 25-kilo high-explosive shell in my arms that you don't want to drop on the floor, blinded and winded by smoke, thinking, well, this is how I die, apparently. Managed to fumble around, slot the shell back into the carry tray as well as engage the coaxial machine gun fan. It's mounted under the machine gun ejection port, and it pulled the smoke outwards when turned on. And I opened the top hatch to let it cycle out. Fun times. The first World Trade Center bombing. Ground floor, the explosion knocks me to my knees. I thought 2 subway trains had crashed below us. A couple of seconds later, the second explosion. I knew this was going to be a problem. I learned years later there was no second explosion, the tower just rang like a bell. It was the building reverberating back to the original bomb site. Went to work somewhere else not long after that. I was watching Archer on my laptop in college, had my headphones on, and in the episode there was an alarm going off. After about 3 episodes, I finally realized, hey, wait, why can I still hear that alarm? I looked up and saw that the end of my corridor was completely engulfed in flames, and the flames were coming at me quickly. Best part was like 40 people just walked by me after the alarm started and let me sit there. Nobody even bothered to warn me. I didn't take the chicken out of the freezer like she'd asked, and then my mum pulled into the driveway. I hunted wild pigs, or razorbacks, in Australia. Since I was a teenager, they wouldn't give me a rifle. They set a line of teenagers up with long poles and what looked like metal trash can lids to bang and make noise in a line formation. We stomp forward, pigs run the other way towards the hunters. In theory. Occasionally, a male, the ones with the horns, will have enough testosterone stored in their sacks to charge at us. That's when we're supposed to take the pole and push them away. Yeah, nah. Like 14-year-old idiot me dressed in a leather apron is going to push this 400-pound pork monster off me with a stick. Brown Man here took a trip to Big Bend National Park a few years ago with a bunch of green herb. Got to my campsite in view of the Rio Grande, high as frick, and realized I'm on federal land on the US-Mexico border with a not insubstantial quantity of a regulated substance. I've made a huge mistake. One night when I was in active addiction, I was drinking heavily and also taking a hefty dose of oxycodone. I felt my heart slow down to a crawl and I was having a lot of trouble breathing. Very easily could have died there, but I found it partly comedic in that moment. Don't do substances, kids. Was on a school trip to Austria, skiing. A guy who didn't like me and repeatedly picked on me came into my room with all of his mates and pushed me to a window. I thought it was just a joke until he put a knife to my throat. I instantly stopped laughing. He stared at me for a good 30 seconds and walked out of my room, which didn't have a lock on the door. I didn't sleep that night. That moment when you're gunning it up a hill on an ATV and you're about 90 degrees before the pinnacle and you let off the gas too early because you thought you were going to flip backwards and everything perpetually slows and then goes completely still before the hill crest, and it's quiet and you know Newton's law, so you just chuckle and think, well, I guess we're going to roll backwards now and hope for the best. What was the most epic comeuppance you've ever seen a spoilt brat get? I guess the situation is only epic to me because it seems like spoiled kids always win. I took my kids to a children's museum when they were toddlers. There was a specific area for toddlers with a whole grocery store set up. Such is life there. There was an 8 or 9-year-old kid in the toddler area being a pain in the butt. He kept taking all of the other kids' toys, hoarding all of the shopping carts. He'd hand out a few pieces of food to the kids, but mainly wouldn't let them touch or play with anything else. Now, normally I'd let my own awesome kid deal with the situation. He doesn't take crap from anybody. But they started getting into it when this kid got on my son's nerves, and then the older kid hit my son. Done. I went over to the kid, got right up in his face and said, "No, we do not hit, get out." Instant tears. He dropped all of his toys and left the play area. His mum caught the tail end of the scene and tore him a new one. "What is wrong with you? I can't turn around for 2 minutes. Then some other parent has to come in and tell you how to behave?" Unfortunately, too little too late for that one. I played football in the local kids' league. One kid from another team was basically untouchable as his dad was a major sponsor of the league and would donate money for uniforms and drinks and stuff. His son was a pretty good receiver but didn't like getting hit, and his parents made a big deal out of leaving their son alone so he could develop his skills. He was insufferable. Anytime he scored a touchdown, he'd do over-the-top celebrations and mock all of the other players, his teammates included. Then came high school. Most of the kids from the league ended up in one of 2 schools. He went to mine, along with some other players, and during tryouts he did do well. The coaches were mostly focused on skills and minimal contact during the first few rounds of cuts. The final round was when things got interesting. Full contact was permitted and he got rocked over and over again. No one was actually trying to tackle any harder than normal, it's just that this guy didn't know what to do when he got tackled. So he screamed and cried a lot. He didn't make the team. That is until his dad came down to the school and offered to donate money for uniforms and some other goodies for our sports team. So he made the team and again we were told to take it easy on him. So we did, but the other teams didn't. And he went up against some of the players he'd mocked previously. And they remembered. Our quarterback kept passing to him and he was getting repeatedly smashed, over and over again. It was the only time our team cheered for the other team. He quit playing football after that. Spare the rod and you'll spoil the boy. Obviously, the narrator doesn't actually condone corporal punishment of children, but this is maybe one of those very rare scenarios where shielding the kid from the reality of the fact that tackles happen and should be trained for in football is a bad long-term strategy for the kid and his team. Preferential treatment just sort of screws people up most of the time. Oh, I've got a fun one. This one I handled myself. I waited tables in a breakfast diner a few years back. 2 ladies came in and towed one of their kids along. A chubby boy with gold chains and a nice watch. This kid is probably 10 to 11 for reference. Mum is very clearly tired of dealing with him as he's very demanding. Blurts out what he wants before I can say hi, among some other behavioral issues. Partway through the meal, he holds up his Sprite cup and shakes it at me and utters only the word more. Mum looks aghast and chastises him for being so rude, to which he begrudgingly apologizes. I shrugged and told him, "Don't apologize to me, apologize to your mum." Was a little worried when I came back around with his Sprite and saw his hot, salty tears streaming down his chubby face. Mum left me a $10 tip on the $30 bill, however, so I think she was happy with my service. I went on a bushwalk in Singapore, and there are pretty clear signs around to not feed the monkeys as they can get aggressive. Anyway, there were these two boys around the ages of 8 swearing and throwing sticks and rocks at a little monkey in a tree. The dad was standing there laughing and allowing this to go on. I was about to say something when one of the kids ripped open a bag of Skittles and started throwing them. The monkey immediately ran down the branch, snatched the Skittles, and at the same moment, another 3 monkeys came out of nowhere and in an epic display of monkey justice, swarmed the kids, making them and the dad run away for dear life. I used to work at a women's shelter. Christmas time rolls around and a man and his sourpuss teenaged son come to the door. He says his son would like to donate some items to the kids staying at the shelter. Great! The man and his son started hauling in some expensive items. There was an Xbox, a bunch of games, a flat-screen TV, iPod, cool headset, a few other things. Turns out the kid ran his mouth and the dad made him give everything to the other kids. Christmas was pretty cool for our gang that year. I worked as an outdoor camp instructor. One week I was on logistics and had to drive the van to pick up kids. I'd heard from my friend that one of the kids in his group was a little crapbag, backchatting, being lazy, bullying other kids. When I got to the pickup point, the kids hopped into the van and my mate got in the front seat. He gave me the rundown on the trouble causer. As I started the van up, I did a visual check of seatbelts and everyone was good except for this one kid. I asked and he said no. I told him I can't leave until he puts it on. So he did and I started to leave. A minute down the road, I heard him unclip his seatbelt, so I had to stop the van and ask him again. He put it back on. This happened one more time. On the third time, I just pulled over, turned the van off, I radioed base and asked for my manager and the overseeing teacher who was this kid's dean to come and pick this kid up because he was a danger to the others in the van. That's when this kid started pleading and begging. I told him no, I already made the call. He got sent home. My mate Mitch had one of his best weeks after this kid left. One time I wouldn't give my daughter a push on the swing because she was whining instead of asking. She knows we don't listen to whining, but her grandpa was there, so she was testing me. When she figured out I really wasn't going to do it, she grabbed the rope from the swing and flung the swing at me. It missed me, came back and smacked her right in the face. I'm sure it hurt too because it was a board with rope through the middle. Not that I'm happy that my kid was hurt over it, but I think it taught her about karma that day. I think I was around 9 or so when I made friends with another kid down the road. It was his grandparents' place and he visited a lot. If I remember correctly, we met through baseball. He was incredibly overweight and bossy. He always made the rules of the games we played and would throw major tantrums if I objected. For instance, while playing with action figures, I had the toy do some cool flips. He went crazy saying how it needed to be realistic. The first time I visited his house, I was blown away by the volume of toys he had. Growing up fairly poor, I was accustomed to having maybe one cool toy. He had all the PlayStation games and a huge collection of anime VHSs. Not surprisingly, his parents were overweight as well, and would make dense dinners that would take me 2 days to recover from. Eventually, one sleepover, he wanted to play wrestle with me. Didn't take but a second to know how bad of an idea that was, with him being more than 100 pounds, especially since he wanted us to be shirtless. I know, right? So I refused and he cried, telling me to take my shirt off and to wrestle. I remember walking out and asking his mum for a ride home. She just gave me the look of, I understand. 2 days later, he showed up to my house asking for me to come out. My brother told him I wasn't home as I walked by the door to the kitchen. He flipped out and that's the last I heard of him. I didn't know you were friends with Eric Cartman. On the first day of a 2-week vacation, I saw my spoiled 10-year-old cousin tell his mother, his older female cousin, his aunt and his grandmother that he wasn't going to clear his place or rinse his dishes because that's woman's work. For the rest of that 2-week vacation, nobody had to lift a finger to clear a plate, rinse a dish or wash a pot because it was his job. At times, there were over a dozen of us there. That's right, ladies, work the misogyny right out of the kid. He's got time to learn, and there's still hope for him as long as these sorts of important lessons are being taught. The narrator probably wouldn't have survived that women's work quote if he had tried that crap growing up. Here at UConn, they serve special mac and cheese on certain days. I'm sure a lot of schools do it, but our bacon jalapeno mac is pretty damn good. Well, a certain sophomore from a wealthy family who was used to being bailed out of trouble by his rich parents got drunk and decided he wanted some mac and cheese. He was clearly intoxicated and had the brass pair to walk around the food court drinking beer. The manager sees this and won't let him in the food line. As seen in a video someone took, our boy spent the next 10 minutes mercilessly berating the poor guy and his staff for being beneath his station. The manager gives him so many chances to just walk away, but this guy isn't leaving without his mac and cheese. He shoves the manager, not for the first time, and another employee decides he's done with this crap. The hero employee tackles our boy and pins him. The craphead spends the next few minutes pinned to the ground while the cops arrive, screaming, "I'm absolutely fricked!" And he's arrested. Not his first arrest either, and not his first expulsion from college. From what I hear, he's since been arrested or expelled from another school. We'll never forget you, mac and cheese kid. Maybe not the harshest, but it still pleased me. I used to work at a pony camp that catered to rich kids from a very nice neighborhood. We'd have really spoiled kids all the time. While annoying, the most frustrating part was trying to maintain authority just so the little bags of crap don't get themselves crushed by a 1,000-pound animal. Anyway, we had a maybe 10-year-old kid from some mildly famous sportscaster one week. The kid was just awful. She ignored everything we told her and was mean to the other kids in camp. At one point, she started a physical fight with another girl, and when she felt like she was getting beaten, she started yelling, "Don't you know who my mom is? I'm gonna tell her!" The other kid got scared and started crying. My coworker replied, "Actually, I do know your mom, and I know she wouldn't like to hear about this. Why don't I call her right now?" The little brat didn't believe her, so my coworker did. She was much easier to deal with for the rest of the week after that. Turns out my coworker worked with her mum many times over the years. She's a professional makeup artist for TV and did her makeup more than a few times. Suck it, you spoiled brat. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I used to work at a non-overnight summer camp and after-school program, and a week-long soccer camp. The town isn't huge, so needless to say, over the few years I got to know several kids from different programs. One 10-year-old boy I knew from after school was a total jerk. Bully, snob, didn't think he had to listen, a tattletale, which is my personal pet peeve. He was just awful. He came to my soccer camp and proceeded to make fun of an 8-year-old girl because she had cleats where he had the newest Nikes and a brand new cool design ball. Unfortunately for him, I also knew this 8-year-old girl and knew that the reason her cleats looked old and worn down is that she was a mother-frickin' beast, just all-around amazing athlete who loved soccer and played hours every day. So I paired him with her for a simple drill where one person started with the ball and you just tried to get past the other person and kick the ball at the other stationary ball or cone about 10 yards away to simulate passing and scoring accurately while under pressure. He was of course angry, saying she was too young and a girl. I said if he hit the cone 3 times, he could pick his own partner. He again pointed out her shoes to me as if that were going to change my mind, before finally giving in and playing. She proceeded to humiliate him over the next few minutes, not once letting him dribble past her in 5 attempts. He was livid, bending down, messing with laces as if the shoes really mattered, and then saying he needed to use his ball. Nothing worked. He was so angry I thought he was going to be violent, but then it was her turn to be on offense. He talked some kind of smack, I forget what, and refused to let her use his ball. She didn't say a word and got a new ball. I blew whistle and she did a step-over fake, which made him move to the side. She stood back up straight and kicked it between his legs and hit the cone. She'd barely even moved, and he was so frickin' angry. Second round, he charged at her, screaming. She kept her cool, wound back like she was going to drill it to his dumb face. He ducked and squealed as she dribbled around him with his hands still covering his head, and she hit the cone. I didn't make her embarrass him for the remaining 3 attempts, and called a water break. This kid was just dumbfounded. He honestly thought his shoes were going to make him better without any effort. He was better behaved the rest of the week, but I honestly think she just broke his spirit. He seemed out of it. I hope he's doing alright. The girl is like an all-American high school soccer player last I checked. Won't be surprised if it's her in the Olympics one day. I was on a flight from Washington Dulles to Heathrow. This 6 to 8-year-old behind me was screaming the whole flight, constantly whining at his mum for food, toys, whatever. Mum was the "shh, honey, no, honey, shh, sweetheart" kind of type of mum. Finally, she had to get up to use the restroom. The kid starts wailing. The guy next to me leaned up in his seat, turned around and said, "Hey, kid, shut the frick up." The whole plane didn't clap, but we enjoyed 5 minutes of dead silence from him until Mum came back. This one was told to me by my parents since I was too young to remember at the time. The neighborhood bus stop for the Catholic high school was on the corner of where our house sits. Sometimes when it was raining, the kids would wait right next to our house for cover. That didn't bother my parents. They had kids. They didn't want someone else's kids standing out in the rain. What did bother them was when they realized the kids started passing the time by ripping up all the flowers around the house. The parents called the school to complain and had a nice chat with the principal. That Saturday, all the kids who used that stop showed up to replant the flowers, which they or their parents paid for. When the flowers were replanted, they got to spend a few more hours helping with our other yard work. Then the school moved their bus stop to the main road on the edge of the neighborhood. That meant about 2 more blocks of walking every day for most of them and waiting in a field with no shelter from the bad weather. That seems like a lot of time and money to invest in punishing what essentially are just dumb idiot kids not thinking their actions through. Then again, even if this group had learned their lesson, the following year's kids might do the same thing, so I guess it was a preventative measure. Was at a family event for my girlfriend of the time. One of her cousin's kids was just running around making a ruckus in spite of the numerous times his parents told him to settle down. Eventually, he took an interest in the motion-activated Glade air freshener on the counter. It had been turned off because it would be spraying non-stop with all the people around. So this little 6-year-old bag of crap is standing on his tiptoes, ignoring the constant warnings of "don't touch that please," and reaching over, pushing buttons, and eventually it happens. Flips the switch to on, and 3 seconds later he gets a direct blast of Glade straight to the face. I worked at Taco Bell in high school. At the time, we had kids' meals. This kid comes in with his parents and orders a kids' meal. Apparently, he had been in recently and already had that toy. He started screaming at me to get him another toy. His dad looked at me with an absolutely dejected look on his face and begged me to get the toy. I dug through the new box of toys and found one. The kid ripped it out of my hands and ran outside, directly into a rose bush. My coworker was legit laying on the ground, laughing. I was at the park with my brother's wife and their daughter, my niece, and oversaw the following exchange. A young kid, probably between 5 and 7, was being obnoxious. Every 15 minutes or so, his grandparents, I assume they were his grandparents, they'd gather his toys and bring him over to their bench and put him in timeout for a few minutes. He threw tantrums, but they would completely ignore him when he screamed and calmly asked him if he was finished. Timeout didn't stop until he stopped crying. He'd go back to playing, then get all wound up and end up in timeout again. This happened 3 or 4 times in the hour that we were at the park. Finally, he made a little girl cry by taunting her that she didn't have a certain toy and he did. I think it was a Minecraft thing. The grandparents calmly walked over, took the toy from him, gave it to the little girl, and they left the park. This kid lost his absolute crap the entire time they were heading out. Boy Scout camp out in Utah. Back when the Boy Scouts were pretty much run by the Mormon church, a porcupine walked through our camp and this spoiled rich kid got a stick and chased it up a tree. We all told him to stop. He wouldn't listen. The scout leaders were off doing God knows what at the time, so this porcupine is up in the tree and now the spoiled weenie wants to shoot hard candy at it with his wrist rocket. He can't get a clear shot, so he climbs up the tree and sits on a branch under the porcupine, shoots a hard candy at the porcupine and hits it hard. It was right then that he learned that when a treed porcupine feels threatened, it just lets go and lets the quills break the fall. This big porcupine fell right onto the spoiled kid's shoulder, bounced off, hit his thigh, and then landed on the ground. It waddled away and we just laughed at the now howling, spoiled kid. One of the scout leaders had to drive the kid to an emergency room. I hope the scout leader caught hell for not supervising as well. I went to high school in a super affluent area, and a few years after I graduated, a bunch of kids got busted because a kid paid his tutor for a flash drive with a key swiping code, stole several teachers' passwords, and changed his and his friends' grades in the system. They made an argument in their defense that it wasn't their fault because they were so wealthy and used to being handed things that they didn't know how to work for them. Affluenza and whatnot. They got expelled. They made national news for being arrogant D-bags, and all the other districts in the area argued over who would take them because nobody wanted to. A few years later, my alma mater made national news again when a prom draft ring was exposed, where guys would get together and have a fantasy football-style draft over who got to take whom to prom. It was exposed after a girl complained to administration that she didn't want to go with the guy who picked her in the draft, and the guy threw a tantrum because apparently he had paid off a bunch of people to get first pick, and thus he felt he owned her on prom night. Everyone in the draft was suspended or banned from prom, if I remember correctly. Arrogant rich kids are the worst. I was about 15. I was in the woods with some friends, a local public nature reserve, playing on a rope swing, drinking energy drinks and eating snacks, chatting, just having a good time keeping to ourselves, really. The rope swing itself was on a very tall tree, hanging over what I can only explain as a miniature valley. 2 small hills with a gap in the middle, rope swing on one side, but we'll reach the other side. You get it. Then some other kids came along on their bikes. Maybe between ages 10 and 12, dressed up in tracksuits and quite mouthy. You know the type. They told us to move along from their rope swing. It wasn't theirs. I set that thing up myself because I was like Spider-Man kid back then. I could climb anything. Obviously we said no, but we did say we'll leave it to them for a bit if they want to have a go, because there's no reason we can't all enjoy it. They wouldn't take that answer, so we carried on playing on the rope swing, but then they began throwing sticks and rocks at us. It didn't faze us at first. Next thing, one of them tries to show off and speeds down the hill on his bike to try and grab me while I swing. But his mate throws a stick at the same time and it lodges in his wheel and sends him flying down the hill. To add insult to injury, he flies off right in my swing path and gets 2 knees to the ribs. Completely took the wind out of him, so they all left feeling defeated. It feels good because we did nothing out of order, the cards just kind of worked out for us. How about that kid who tried to get off from killing 4 people in a drunk driving accident by claiming he suffered from affluenza, being too rich to know right from wrong? He was caught after fleeing to Mexico and ended up serving just 2 years in prison. When did you troll law enforcement and what happened? College town. Huge party. Excise cops are in town busting parties left and right. Ours gets busted. They proceeded, handing out tickets to underage drinkers. One kid gets a scrap of a piece of paper, folds it into the shape of the tickets the cops are handing out, and sits on the front steps with his head in his hands repeating, "My parents are gonna frickin' kill me." And the cops just pass him by. There was a speed trap where I grew up on Pennsylvania Route 74. One of the markers, since it was a VASCAR trap, was a white plastic jug. I often stopped along that route when I saw the jug there, grabbed the jug, and drove off. I got stopped once doing this. The cop seemed really angry. I told him, "I see that thing there all the time, and it really bothers me that no one's bothered to pick up the trash." I was speeding once, and I mean seriously speeding. I saw the lights come up behind me, and I freaked out. I pulled over and noticed I had a bottle of water next to me. I took it and poured it all over my lap and put on the most embarrassed look that I could. He asked if I knew why he had pulled me over, and I responded, "I'm sorry, officer, I really had to pee and I was trying to get to the nearest restroom, but…" And then I made big innocent eyes. I peed myself. Something in me knew that this cop didn't want me to touch his pen, his paper, didn't want to touch my license, nothing. As far as he was concerned, I was just gross. He said, "Well, next time use the bathroom before you go and slow it down," and he let me go. When I was a senior in high school, we got a new vice principal from some inner-city school who thought he was a real hard case. He'd actually go around smelling kids' fingers for the scent of devil's lettuce. My buddy and I came back from lunch one day, both stone-cold sober, and heard Mr. Hardcase, whose real name I forget, he was coming out of the parking lot to check fingers. My friend looked at me, then wedged his right hand down the back of his pants to his butt crack. He left it in there until we saw the VP coming our way, then pulled it out nonchalantly while we waited. Sure enough, the VP walked up and in his usual threatening manner told us to hold out our hands. I did. He smelled my fingers, then moved on to my friend. I could barely keep from losing it as he took a big sniff and then literally jumped backwards, yelling something about my friend needing to wash his damn hands. Needless to say, this ended the finger-smelling technique at my high school. I'm going to say here that personally I think smelling any part of a pubescent child is a pretty terrible idea, even before you consider the gross and pervy side of things. That gross kid probably helped the VP dodge a bullet in the future. Around 2 a.m. on a Saturday night, I was pulled over for suspicion of DWI. I hadn't had a drop. They asked me to step out of the car and gave me a sobriety test, which I passed with flying colors. They asked me if they could search the vehicle, and I told them they could search the vehicle with the sole exception of the center console. They'd need a warrant for that. After several hours of sitting roadside, they finally produced a warrant from a judge. The center console was empty. This was about 10 years ago. My mother had a large plant in a plastic pot that had died. I took the pot full of dirt and put it in the trunk of my car to help replant something at my house. I forgot about it for a few weeks. I got pulled over for something else. The cop asked, "Do you know why I pulled you over?" And I said, was it the speeding or was it because of the pot in my trunk? He got me out of the car and had me put my palms on the hood while I was searched. He opened the trunk and wasn't happy. I got chewed out for wasting his time and such and such. I noticed that not one single car passed, so it wasn't wasting too much of his time. I've never actually done this, but I always wanted to. Get 5 total friends together, all wearing costumes, dress up as a biker, construction worker, Indian, cowboy, and a GI. Then go to a public place where the police walk around and just follow the cop. When my buddy and I were about 16 and stupid as hell, we did a lot of nonsense playing on cops, but this was by far our best. We'd spend a ton of time lurking around grocery and toy stores at 3 a.m., toy stores earlier, obviously, until one of us got an idea looking at an item in a way that it wasn't intended to be used in the way we wanted to use it. Normal hilarity ensued, Vaseline on padlocks, bubbles in fountains, that kind of stuff, but this night was different. We're sitting in the sandwich aisle of our local store and my buddy's eyes lit up. He looks over at me and goes, "Get that peanut butter, the smooth kind." This having been about the 4th year of us doing this, I wasn't 100% sure what he was going to use it with, but I knew not to question it. So I bought 2 of those huge, smooth peanut butter things. We walked outside, crossed the street, and he tells me to rip the seal off the peanut butter and to get some on my fingers and mess up the smooth top. This is where it clicked. We then proceeded to walk absolutely as suspiciously as possible through this little town square. Sure enough, halfway through, we get spotlighted. The cop pulls up, tells us to stop, and we both instinctively put the peanut butter behind our backs, obviously holding something. The cop gets out and the conversation with my friend goes like this. "What have you got there, son?" "Nothing." "What's behind your back?" "Nothing." I couldn't help but giggle a little bit. "Show me your hands." My buddy very slowly puts the peanut butter behind his shoes and socks and shows the cop his hands. "Give me that." "It's mine." The cop reaches behind my friend's feet and grabs this jar of peanut butter. He spins the top off and sees that it's not in pristine shape. Demands to know what's in it. "Peanuts, salt, maltodextrin, red 3. "What did you hide in the peanut butter?" "Nothing." "Then why do you have it?" "Sandwiches." The cop looks at my pal and then back at me, still holding the peanut butter behind my back, and he does it. He shoves his hand and arm into my pal's peanut butter and starts throwing hunks out into the parking lot. And my friend loses it. He went off on a tirade of peanut rights, the peanut rebellion, just harassing us because we're white, peanut civil rights, the peanut pride parade, who doesn't know about the PPP, and on and on. The cop realizes there's nothing in it and turns to me furious. Doesn't say a word, just grabs my peanut butter, almost knocks me over. I tell him Mr. Goodbar's lawyer will hear of this. This guy does the same thing to me, and I launch into a tirade about my working family and our right to sandwiches, and the peanut labor movement and collective bargaining rights and candy power fighting the man, so on and so forth. He figures out what's going on, slams himself back into his car, covered in peanut butter, yells something about us breaking curfew, kinda half chuckling, and tears out. My friend tells him he owes us a sandwich as he drives away. And I thought that was the end of the story, and it was until 5 years ago. I was telling this to my brother's best friend, who I didn't know was the son of the police dispatcher for our town at the time. Apparently he had to go back and fill out incident paperwork as there was no way to hide this peanut stuff on his steering wheel, car, and uniform. The next day there was a sandwich on his chair, the day after that, baseball peanuts in his locker, the day after, peanut butter in the showers, and so on and so forth. He still gets peanut-related trolling to this day. In short, trolled a cop with peanut butter that could have had substances in it but had nothing. Other cops get in on the prank afterwards. I refuted a police noise complaint with a decibel meter and a printout of the Boston Municipal Code on noise ordinance. The best kind of right is technically right. I mean, honestly, that's fantastic. They can't even use the parting shot of just keep it down, because you can point to the decibel meter and say, "We are." Awesome. My friend's story. He was smoking green herb in high school with his best friend. They were both guys. They had to sneak away from their parents, so they smoked in one of their cars at a scenic outlook near Roanoke, Virginia. Sure enough, officers found them in the car, but luckily they'd already finished and put the green stuff away. When the officer asked my friend what he was doing there, the officer suspected what they were doing. My friend said he was in love with the other guy and they were about to make out. The damn southern cop didn't know what hit him, so he just walked away. It was a few days before New Year's in the Bay Area's Chinatown. I was about 14 then, and me and my group of friends would always walk from school to my house just to hang out and play video games. There were about 6 of us walking up this really steep hill to where I lived. When you've lived in the same area for 10 years, you notice things that are unusual, out of place, and just don't seem right. The strange thing I noticed was a guy, late 30s, with sunglasses on and a hat, sitting in a white pickup truck reading a magazine. We were inside my apartment for about 30 minutes before we decided to go get some food. I saw the truck on the other corner and the guy spots us. He rolls down the window and yells, "Do you guys have any fireworks for sale?" I told him I couldn't hear him, but I clearly heard him. He asked again. I said, "Do you guys have any fireworks for sale?" I told him again that I couldn't hear him. All of a sudden, he makes a turn, goes down the hill and pulls right up to us. "Do you guys have any fireworks for sale?" I said, "Nope." And he goes, "I know you guys do. I'm not a cop, so it's cool." I told him that it doesn't matter if he's a cop or not. We don't sell fireworks because it's illegal. He starts to get irritated and starts yelling at us at this point. "Come on, guys, stop being wussies. I just want to buy some fireworks for my kids." We're actually walking down the street with him slowly driving next to us, asking. I told him one last time, "I know you're a cop and you're just doing your job, but honestly, we don't sell fireworks. And by the way, a cable car is coming." He goes, "So what?" And I told him, "Because you're going down a narrow one-way street with the cable car coming up the hill towards you." He literally crapped his pants as he could see the cable turn the corner in full speed. He reverses as quickly as he can, clipping a few cars on his way up the hill. A cop on top of the hill sees this and pulls the guy over. The guy gets out of his truck and pulls out his badge to show the other cop that he was undercover. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Okay, so we weren't really intentionally going out of our way to troll them, but it's the closest thing I have. Early in high school, maybe 15 years old, my friends and I are cutting through a church parking lot because there's a trail through the woods on the other side, leading from one of my friends' houses to the others. We all notice the smell of burning green herb while we're near the church, so we're looking around trying to figure out who's smoking. My friend sees someone move inside the church, it's like 1 a.m. at this point, pretty weird, and goes over to check it out. Soon enough, there's 8 cop cars in the parking lot. As it turns out, someone had tried to break into this church the night before, and the pastor and his entire family were sleeping inside in case they came back. They thought that we were the perps returning. The cops just absolutely didn't believe that we were just passing through and smelled the same thing that they surely did and were just checking out the situation. They detained us for 60 to 90 minutes looking around the surrounding forestry for our stuff. One of the cops was going around to each entrance to the church to check for signs of attempted entry. At the back door, he found a roach from a joint on a ledge right inside the church. Apparently, it was the pastor's daughter who had been lighting up right out back and quickly put out the joint and left it when she heard her dad yell because he saw us at the front. They wound up letting her off with a warning and gave me and my friends a free ride for the 1 mile to where we were going with their flashing lights on, which was pretty frickin' cool when we were 15. I grew up in a small town, really small. The only way to have any form of entertainment was to drive 30 minutes to the next city to go to the movies and bowling. It just so happens that on the highway halfway between the two cities there was a small town known for being a speed trap. The highway was out of the jurisdiction of the local cops, so what the marshal would do is hide in the between overpasses to catch speeders, force them to pull over into the frontage road, which was in his jurisdiction. Then he'd claim an exaggerated speed. When people asked to see his radar, which is perfectly legal, he claimed he didn't have to because it was illegal. Any claims reported to his superiors seemed to go ignored until he ran into me. Over time, my friends and I had timed his patrols and realized that he patrolled towards the end of the month. One time he'd stopped a friend for excessive speeding. The officer claimed 92 in a 60 zone, which is BS, and then we knew something had to be done. The officer had taken his plate number and claimed to have seen it speeding many different times, and we knew he'd be looking out for it. So I decided to take my phone and rig it up to record the speedometer and get pulled over by the officer. It took a few tries, but I managed to get pulled over by the same officer for doing 70 in a 60 zone, that being a first-time offense. After giving him my license, he went on to claim I was doing at least 85, and giving me the whole bit about how he can't show me the radar, as well as giving me a ticket claiming it was a repeat offense and how I should be put into jail, with all of this being caught on my phone without him noticing. So a few days later, I show up to the courthouse to pay the ticket, and I managed to talk to the mayor of the town and showed him the video of all this. Thanks to me, the officer got fired, and I didn't have to pay a $400 ticket from that D-bag. In my case, the cops trolled us. Huge house party. A once-a-year thing around Christmas, the famous pirate party. Lady wenches and undressed dudes with eye patches everywhere. Drunken freshmen as far as the eye can see. The cops are called, which we anticipated. They showed up and it's two guys in their 30s. One is just tired, end of a long day, and didn't really seem to want to be dealing with this crap show. The other was kind of amused by all the nautical debauchery. When two of the housemates, both over 21, went out to talk to the cops, the more serious cop just says, "Look, just get some of these people out of there. We don't want a scene, so tell them that we won't arrest anyone." The other cop chimes in with his very best pirate voice, "Unless they're scallywags." The first cop facepalms and gives his partner this look that says, "Really, dude?" Everyone cracks the frick up and clears out in a good mood, taking most of the drunken 18-year-olds elsewhere. This is how police should be most of the time. Polis means of the people. You should only have to worry about them resorting to force or intimidation in situations that are dangerous to them. Good job, Pirate Popo. My mother drives a Jeep, which the top is often off on. We pulled up in the fire lane out in front of a bank because my mum's kind of an idiot and she ran inside to use the ATM. I was 15 at the time, and while she's inside, a police officer walks up to the Jeep, sticks his head in the driver's window and says, "Is this your vehicle, son?" To which I replied, "Yes, I sometimes like to park in illegal places and sit in my own passenger seat." He didn't say a word, stood back, crossed his arms and just glared at me. My mum came out about 10 seconds later. He took a look at her and said, "Have a nice day, ma'am," and walked away. Junior year of college, all of my roommates and I were 21 years of age. I was the only one with a car, so I was the only one who always had to go on beer runs. You can say that I look a bit underage for my age and I drove a sportier car. So within the first month of buying alcohol from this one place, I got pulled over 4 times after leaving the liquor store. 4 times. I'm not kidding. I noticed they had no reason to pull me over except for the fact that I looked under 21. The cops did play legally, I guess, by following me until I did something stupid or noticed something broken with my car. License plate light out, took a right turn into the second lane, side view mirror was broken, rolling stop right onto a red light. They made me do a sobriety test once in our busy college street. I got a lot of honks. Well, after completely inspecting my car, I went out again to purchase alcohol. No surprise, I was being followed by cops when I left. I knew that if I drove perfectly, they couldn't pull me over. I drove around the block for about 15 minutes and I was shocked they were still following me. I eventually hopped onto the highway, got off, and then back on. After about 40 minutes of charades, I was getting thirsty and missing the pregame, so I pulled into my driveway. The cops followed me, waited until I opened my trunk and ran in, and then asked to see my ID for the liquor. I pulled it out with a big grin, and they got in their cars and left. I never got pulled over again, maybe because they finally realized, hey, this idiot is 21. I'm an attorney, and a client was complaining about being followed by the cops every time he was in town. I met him at his house and drove his car one Saturday night. Sure enough, about 5 minutes later, a local cop started following me. I made like 20 turns, all legal, and the cop followed me in every turn. He quit following me when I pulled up into my office parking lot, but I waved as he drove by. I told the client to get a different car, and his problems stopped with bullcrap traffic cops. I told the district attorney what I did, and I got better plea offers for cases where cops were being jerks. A story my troll dad likes to tell is from when he was in dental school at USC in the 70s. The street right next to the building with the dental labs is a really long block, so a lot of people just cross in the middle of the street instead of going to a streetlight. There used to be cops who'd write a lot of jaywalking tickets to people who'd do that. My dad and his friends would make giant water balloon launchers using surgical tubing, and they'd launch water balloons, which they made from dental gloves, at the cop. Once, he saw where they were launching from, but he couldn't get into the building because he didn't have the proper security codes. I work as a paramedic, and often the cops call us out to take someone that's drunk to the hospital. This is really stupid because it just clogs up the ERs and costs all kinds of people unnecessary money. Not to mention the fact that they only call us because they don't want the paperwork of taking someone to jail for such a stupid thing. So we get called out one night around midnight to some guy who's chucked up in the parking lot and was wobbly on his feet. He was pretty damn drunk. Nothing a good night's sleep wouldn't cure though. When we pulled up, who was there but the jerk cop who wrote me a ticket the week before? I told my partner who this was and he took the lead. The cop didn't recognize me. The cop gave us a quick rundown, so we checked the guy out and then this happened. My partner said, "So, what do you want me to do with him?" The cop said, "Take him to the hospital." "Why? There's no medical problem. We're concerned about alcohol poisoning." "Well, I'm not and I have more training than you." "Look, just take him." No, we really don't operate like that. Well, he needs to go sober up. My partner asks the patient, do you want to go to the hospital? The guy says no. See, I can't force him. Well, he can't stay here in the parking lot. Oh, I see the problem now. The cop's face lights up. Yeah? Yeah, he's your problem. We don't take drunks for just being drunk. The cop looks stunned and then turns to me hoping for a different answer. He still doesn't recognize me. I said, maybe you can just give him a ticket. Then the fire captain got in the cop's face and threatened to get his supervisors out of the scene to adjust the officer's attitude, saying things like, you don't talk to my medics like that. The fire department has that kind of clout here. We left and I giggled for a few days afterwards. I live right outside of my city's limits, which means I'm right outside of the local police department's jurisdiction. In high school, my friends and I would always hang out at my house, so one night we all decided to go to the local McDonald's to raid the dollar menu. We were riding through town, not causing too much trouble. We got our feast and were heading back to my house when we realized there's a cop following us. Now, we're playing music loud enough for it to be heard, but still quiet enough not to be noise pollution. We were also going a few miles over the speed limit like most people did. I guess the officer realized we were leaving the city limit and wanted to catch us before we got away. We were literally 100 feet away from the city limit sign and 400 feet from my driveway when he put on the sirens. Instead of pulling off the road right there in the traffic, I just drove into my driveway and the officer pulls right in behind me. My friends and I get out of the car and the officer pulls his weapon and tells us to get on the ground. My mum and stepdad come running out of the house to straighten the officer out. Chaos ensues and the officer fires a warning shot. This scared the neighbor and they called the sheriff's office and asked for a unit to come. Now it turns out that the local police department and the sheriff's department really don't like each other. A sheriff shows up to respond to the neighbor's call and ends up ticketing the police officer for trespassing and disturbing the peace. Which creepy urban legend turned out to be true? When I was about 12 years old, a friend and I were playing in the woods that were known for being creepy. While building a fort, a strange man snuck up behind us and yelled at us to get off his land and never come back, yada yada. It really startled us as we both knew the land was a public area and had never been threatened by an adult before. Several years later, we found out he was an actual bank robber called Carl Gugation, wanted by the FBI for years. We were building our fort a few feet from his stash. The man that worked in a law firm on the 24th story of a building. As a running gag, he'd tell everyone that the windows in the building were unbreakable and then proceed to run at them full force. Once he did it and the glass didn't break, but the window popped out of the frame and he fell to his death 24 stories. I'd seen this on an urban legends show when I was a kid, but found out later it really happened in my city of Toronto, Canada. My boyfriend works in the same building, and rumor has it that the man landed on a concrete bench at concourse level, where a woman and her child had just been sitting there seconds before his fatal plunge. Yeah, my mum worked in an office adjacent to where he fell to his death. Everyone was sent home early in all of the buildings around it. Apparently he'd been doing this stunt for quite a while with the tour groups, and the problem was that he always used the same window. Each time he did it, he was weakening the window until it just couldn't take it anymore. My favorite part of the story is that he was right. The glass didn't break. The whole pane popped out of its frame. The ghost squirrel in my hometown of Dorking in the UK. There was a ghost squirrel called Albie that was only ever seen in the graveyard at the church in town. Turns out it was an albino squirrel that had a nest in one of the trees in the graveyard. Unfortunately, he became roadkill a couple of years back. I live near a lake and there was an urban legend that there were huge lake monsters near the hydroelectric dam. Most people thought it was just some fisherman's tall tales. We all guessed it was just a twist on the classic, one that got away. Turns out divers went into the water behind the dam for a routine inspection to see if there was any damage after months of heavy flooding in the area. Apparently, one of the divers got too close to what he originally thought was a large moss-covered rock or boulder until it moved and tried to latch onto the diver's arm. Apparently, there are 200-pound catfish behind the dam which thrive on the dead fish that go through the hydroelectric portion of the dam. The agitated water makes it easier for the large catfish to breathe and grow past what's commonly found in the area, and the lack of fishers, as all commercial fishing is banned for at least 1,000 meters, means these fish are truly free to grow to massive sizes. Great, so on top of all the bacteria and parasites that can get us without us realizing when we swim in fresh water, now we have to worry about shark-sized catfish? I know that isn't super threatening, I'm just saying it would scare the crap out of me. Then again, if I'm swimming behind the dam in what sounds like a dead ground-up fish slurry, maybe I have other things to worry about. Oh, I have one. In Anchorage, people will tell the story of a woman who died after getting stuck in only knee-deep mud out in Turnagain Arm. The story has all the elements. She was a newlywed, rescuers were gathered around trying to help her, etc., etc. I think it's widely regarded as an urban legend. But it most certainly did happen. Her name was Adina Dickerson. It took place in September 1988. I guess not really a legend unless you didn't believe it. My town and surrounding area has multiple old pirate smuggling tunnels under it, going from towns to beaches. Most of the tunnels are under pub or shop basements. Also, when I say pirate, I do mean like the R pirates. Penzance, UK. Not creepy so much, but in my small rural hometown, there was a rumor that a bunch of city officials, cops, teachers, business owners, among others, basically anyone a kid would see as an authority figure, had massive adult whoopee parties. Obviously, as you grew up, you came to your senses. Until one year when a teacher's husband stomped the absolute crap out of a local business owner in broad daylight. Turns out the legend wasn't just a legend. His wife was apparently a member of what was called the Hot Tub Club, and he wasn't invited. A good chunk of local leaders got outed as hosting these parties somewhat regularly. I'm more surprised it was kept secret for as long as it was. It was only a legend for like a week, but a kid went missing on the same property we lived on, and everyone thought his brother had something to do with it, but the police said no, he was kidnapped. Turns out the brother had killed his brother and buried him in our backyard. We had an older couple that would come into the store I worked at when I was 15. They clearly had mental development and mental health problems, and the rumor was they were siblings and the two teenage girls with them were their children. About 5 years later, I'd find out someone had called the state about them, and it turns out, from what I remember, it was mostly true. The parents were apparently the result of incest, and they carried on the family tradition, as it were. I think the state removed their daughters and put them in state custody since they weren't able to take care of themselves, and I don't remember what happened to the parents. In my hometown, there was a local legend about a man who would sometimes be seen doing the deed with trees. He had a number of local names, none of which could be said on YouTube. However, most of them involve clever wordplay around wood or trees. I thought it must be nonsense, but one night a friend and I were out walking his dog along a narrow, tree-lined lane when we heard a grunting sound from the undergrowth, and there he was. He was wearing a long overcoat which had wrapped up around a poor innocent tree, and he had his trousers around his ankles as he defiled the shrubbery with a flagrant disregard for splinters. In Kenya, Mombasa, there was a story about a woman with long black hair and a white dress who'd be seen around the beach at night, and it was to stop people from being at the beach swimming in the ocean. Turned out to be true. It was an older lady who'd sleepwalk on the beach in her 90s. Even she didn't know until locals found the courage to follow her home. When I was young, living rural Ontario, we were told as children not to wander too far into the forest, saying that a monster would get us and we wouldn't come home. If anybody knows who Rock-Terrio is, it actually turned out to be painfully true. I often wonder if Stephen King's Children of the Corn was based on a northern town in Maine. I don't recall the name of the town, but my friends and I stopped in on our way to the furthest US point east. The town struck me as very weird, because every store clerk was like 14 or 17 max. Not just one or two stores, every store. Aside from ourselves, we didn't come across one adult in the 2 hours or so we were there. It was a depressed town, nearly a ghost town, and it left me with a really unsettled feeling. Black Volga. In the 60s and 70s, there existed an urban legend in Poland that vampires in black limousines were kidnapping people, preferring small infants. It was a tale parents told their kids who would then tell their friends. Turns out it was a rumor that was spread by the Polish secret police who actually used black cars to kidnap people. The aim was that no one would believe someone who'd report they'd witnessed a kidnapping. I remember being wary around all black cars, since I'd never seen a Volga. Also, I heard the version of the tale where they'd kidnap people to steal their organs and then dump their bodies by the road, which is messed up. Welcome to the world of acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, better known by its acronym form. This is an urban legend about a man meeting a woman at a bar, going back to his place to sleep together only to have him wake up to her being gone and the famous slogan, "Welcome to the world of AIDS," written on his bathroom mirror. The urban legend has many different variations. It was just a parable about casual bedroom times and the risk involved. This was largely considered an urban legend, that is until stealth posing actually turned out to be a very real thing. Modern actual cases involve a British man named Darryl Rowe who, already knowing that he had it, would send a text after doing the deed to his many victims saying things like, "I have human immunodeficiency virus, lol, whoops, and I'm riddled." Others have also been convicted for knowingly doing this on Craigslist. The Asylum Lake tunnels in Kalamazoo are real. There's a small lake and wildlife area just off WMU's campus, and for a long time there were rumors going around that they were still there and accessible. Well, turns out it was true, and there was an old set of stairs that was partially buried that led up to a walled-up tunnel entrance. A few people used hand tools and ended up breaking part of the wall down and got inside, only to find the tunnels fully intact, albeit a bit damp and murky. Somehow, the authorities got wind and went and sealed the entrance again, but it's still very obvious where that was if you're really looking for them. Not really an urban legend, but a fish cafe in my hometown says that its supports are made out of whale bones. Turns out many years ago, a whale got stranded on a nearby island and died, and the owner took some rib bones and used it as arches for his business. I'd still contest whether they're supports and that I don't think they add anything to the structural integrity of the building, but it's a cool claim to be able to sort of back up in any case. When I was a kid, my dad would take me and my brother to High Rock. It's a neat overlook and we could play on the rocks. It was fun, but also a little sobering, as much as things can be for kids, because a girl had died in a hang gliding accident, if I remember rightly. As you drive up to the parking lot of the overlook, the road continues on into the woods. We asked our dad where it went, and he told us you'd be driving down the road and suddenly armed guards would pop out of the woods to stop you because there's a secret government base there. That's the case, except it isn't really secret. It's Raven Rock, which is a nuclear bunker that can act as a remote Pentagon if the country is attacked. Cheney went there during September 11th while Bush was taken somewhere else. You'll be detained if you trespass on the property. I went back to High Rock a few years ago while visiting family, and while hanging out at the overlook, a truck of teenagers showed up. They asked if I knew what was up the access road, and I told them Raven Rock and not to keep going because they'd be detained. They decided they wanted to check it out anyway. An hour later, when I left High Rock, these kids hadn't come back yet, so I figured they were getting their butts chewed out by a soldier. Fun fact, Raven Rock is the headquarters of the Enclave in Fallout 3. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. The North Pond Hermit. Things would go missing in this little vacation community, and people attributed it to some mysterious dude. Turned out there was one. He lived in the woods for 27 years without ever talking to anyone. He said hi to a hiker once during that 27 years, best friend he ever had. We've got a dude in Milwaukee dubbed the Milverine, the Milwaukee Wolverine. He looks sort of like a Midwestern Logan from the X-Men, and he's sighted all over downtown briskly walking around with his shirt off. Like, no matter what he's doing, rain, shine, blistering heat or freezing cold, he's got his shirt off. Turns out he's just a scruffy construction worker who's pretty ripped and vaguely looks like a superhero. Apparently he's a nice guy, and locals often tell people not to bother him because it's just rude. For a while, a few years ago, people were approaching him all the time, probably for photos and whatnot. That creepy old guy living down the street was actually the Golden State Killer. He lived in my neighborhood. I passed his house every day for years and I never talked to him, but it's crazy to think as kids we'd play at the house 2 houses away from his. Sewer alligators. If alligators or other animals are flushed or disposed of into plumbing, yeah, they can survive and hang out. The guy who boarded a plane at LAX for Oakland and found himself instead headed to Auckland, New Zealand. Cropsey. Sort of like the boogeyman of Staten Island. During the 70s and 80s, kids on the island would go missing, and the urban legend would attribute it to Cropsey. As it turned out, there really was a crazy kidnapper and serial killer who was responsible. He was caught and convicted. There's a great documentary about it. It used to be on Netflix, I'm not sure if it still is, called Cropsey. Check it out if you get the chance. Raymond Robinson, the Green Man. The guy lost his eyes and nose and wandered the streets at night in Pennsylvania because he couldn't go outside in the daytime because of how he looked. People saw him and an urban legend in Philadelphia was born. That there's something making people disappear in our area in Nevada. As a kid, it was more so that they were hinting at aliens. Then as we grew up, the disappearances have been a little too eerie, and it's been suspected that there's investigations that have been going on as to whether or not there's a serial killer in our area. I carry a firearm when traveling through and don't stop until I get to the cities. If you guys are ever coming through, just don't stop for anyone, especially after the darkness sets in. I went to a university near Valley Forge, Philadelphia. It used to be a prisoner of war camp and a military hospital before the college bought the entire property for $1 in the 1960s. Since there are only 3 universities near Valley Forge, Philadelphia, it'll be hard not to deduce which college it is. Anyways, there was a rumor that underground tunnels and all sorts of stuff was left abandoned in the abandoned sections of the college. Sure enough, it was true. We found a tunnel hatch under our carpet in our dorm room, 2 hatches on the first floor, furthest most first-floor dorm room of each building. It was like stepping into 1945. Everything was preserved down there and the tunnels were massive. We eventually ended up in an underground garage where there were 4 Jeeps parked, but all the tires had dry rotted. We realized that this was actually beneath our soccer field. Anyways, the tunnels led to the cafeteria, the admin building, every dorm, and then an old abandoned section of our campus that we had no way of entering topside. We soon realized this was the hospital or morgue. Then we got out of the tunnels and walked the floor. It was still like 1945. All the hospital beds were still there, the surgical curtains were still there. Heck, even the tools like the scalpel, saw, and pliers, they were still on their trays. It was like everyone all of a sudden had up and left and nothing had been moved since then. The morgue still had its slabs, and sometimes we'd dare each other to slide in there for a period of time. But yeah, it was an urban legend on campus until 3 of us decided to risk expulsion to see if it was true. And it was. The Red Ghost. The huge, cloven-footed creature that terrorized southeast Arizona was no figment of the mind. The grisly story of its origin and fate was more macabre in fact than any fiction. It was a camel with the corpse of its rider on its back, surviving out there way longer than anyone would have guessed. Oh, that poor animal. The narrator went and hunted down the story, and it looks like the creature was hunted pretty extensively and may have survived some bullet wounds before it finally went down. For the last several years in Toronto, gay men have gone missing in the Village. The community was convinced it was a serial killer on the loose, but the police said no. These disappearances are unrelated. Turns out it was totally the case, and the guy was killing gay men, dismembering them and burying them in and around the properties he was working at as a groundskeeper/landscaper. MKUltra. The CIA was experimenting with substances to attempt to mind control people. This is, thankfully, a somewhat more light-hearted urban legend than a lot of the ones posted thus far. So I'd heard several times from friends and whatnot hearsay tales about this creepy, near-mythical shoe licker who resided in the Tampa area. Apparently this guy would walk up to people in public spaces and ask them about their shoes and ask to see the bottoms of them, and would then drop and do his best to lick the bottoms of said shoes before the person could step back down. Naturally, I thought that was just way too weird, and there was no way this wasn't just people making up some bullcrap story. And then I ran into the guy at a taco truck. Skinny dude, longish hair, probably homeless from how he was dressed, could have been 18, could have been 30. Walks up as I'm waiting for what turns out to have been the best taco I've ever had in my existence, and asks about the shoes I'm wearing. I just finished performing and was wearing some Doc Marten boots and was more than a little soused. He asks if he can see the treads or something like that, and I'm all confused, and I'm like, yeah, sure, why not? And he drops to the floor, grabs my boot, and starts licking away at the sole. I yelled at the guy, sort of kicked at him, and he scampers off. Weirdest frickin' interaction ever. There were abandoned tunnels below my town. A large part used to be a self-sustaining mental institution covering several square miles. Everyone talked about them, but no one ever talked about actually being in them. Went spelunking in the woods and found an old maintenance shack. There was a basement that was flooded. I went back a couple of years later when there was a bad drought. Basement had a rusted door leading into said tunnels. Nothing special and no escaped crazy people. In my hometown, there were rumors that there was a fallout bunker underground. There were supposed to be tunnels from the schools and various other locations all leading to the bunker. In grade 12, I had a teacher who had been working at that school for basically forever. One of the students asked him if there was a tunnel from the school to a fallout bunker, and he confirmed that there was. He even took us down into the basement past the boiler room to the entrance. It was boarded up. Apparently, it was built during the Cold War. Some woman was living in this guy's house without him knowing it for a year. There's this road called Whippoorwill. Apparently it's either haunted or it's a nesting ground for the Klan and other creepy local cults. There are several articles about it on the internets. Anyways, myself and 2 friends drove there in the nighttime, and a big white Bronco came out of nowhere behind us with huge LED lights and tried to drive us off the road. A very narrow dirt road surrounded by dense trees. They were on our butts like making us speed. A big hill came in the road. It's about a mile long and you should be going slow. When we went over the top, the Broncos stayed behind us and disappeared. It was intense. I figured they were patrolling for a cult or clan meeting, but there is some truth to that urban legend, that's a fact. There's an urban legend about a thief stealing a suitcase containing a dead dog. In the 70s, my crazy artist aunt and uncle lived in Manhattan and their German shepherd died. Having the city come dispose of the dog was expensive, lugging it up to Animal Control Office in the Bronx was cheaper. So they folded up the 50-pound dog into a suitcase and headed for the subway. Except, my uncle set down the heavy suitcase at a crosswalk while they waited for the light, and a couple of kids ran by and snatched it. My uncle gave chase, but obese alcoholics don't get far in New York in the summer. For years they laughed, speculating what those kids said when they opened the luggage. And I wonder, again and again, were they the source of that tale? There's a serial killer targeting gay men in Pittsburgh. Gay men keep turning up in the river after they've been on the Grindr app. Look up Dakota James from Pittsburgh. The police won't release all of the CCTV because they don't want the hysteria. But yep, there's a serial killer there. It keeps happening and no one is doing anything about it. Well, it seems the government really is watching everything we do. Also, no one seems to give a damn. Freddy Krueger is based on a real story. Now, hear me out. There's a small ethnic group located to Southeast Asia, the Hmong people. They've been oppressed for years by various countries, so they fought with the US during the Vietnam Civil War. As you know, we lost, and the North Vietnamese were gearing up to kill the Hmong people who had fought for the Southern Vietnamese. So the US airlifted a bunch of Hmong families to the US, primarily in California and Minnesota. One of the recent immigrants was a young man. He was perfectly healthy but suddenly died in his sleep. No one knew how he died. It was guessed a heart attack, but an autopsy wasn't done. This sent a panic throughout the community. There's a Hmong legend of a spirit that enters your dreams and kills you. Hmong people were terrified. They were also in a new community without access to some old traditions to protect them. Young men started staying awake, trying to avoid the monster. They downed caffeine. They were actually scared enough that it caused stress to their hearts and they died. Eventually, 117 men died from Hmong sleeping sickness. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.